All right, Senator Pearl,
Do we have the
here's the gavel.
sign-in sheet?
I do not have the sign-in sheet yet. This is Jane, she's our new intern, and she's gonna make sure I get those sign-in sheets.
You got him. Here you go, Senator.
Oh, of course, Slip sliding moving.
I'm sorry, it's no singing. No.
Bibles to be exact.
All right, good morning. Welcome to Energy and Natural Resources this morning. Our first bill is going to be Senate Bill 307, and I recognize the prime sponsor, Senator Avard.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, committee members. For the record, I'm Senator Kevin Avard, prime sponsor of SB 307FN, with some great co-sponsors. I see Senator Waters and Senator Pearl on here. This is going to just be a great bill for everybody.
Should be an easy lift then, right?
Absolutely. And basically, this bill allows for the electric transmission service agreements by the New Hampshire Electric Distribution Utilities with the developers of any New England transmission project which has been awarded a grant from or entered into transmission capacity contract with the United States Department of Energy. And so this morning I am introducing it. This legislation would actually create a new mechanism for the New Hampshire electric distribution companies to review electric transmission projects awarded financing by the Department of Energy. By reviewing them, they could determine whether long-term transmission agreements could be in the public interest. Additionally, this bill will allow for our local utilities to assess the Twin State Clean Energy Link. This is a project that most of our Senate colleagues supported in the application phase, and when it was selected as one of the 3 nationwide to receive the federal investments in a competitive process. By passing this legislation, we will enable New Hampshire customers to realize the significant cost savings associated with transmission projects. The project utilizes the existing corridor between Monroe and Londonderry and buries new lines on the state roads in Monroe, Littleton, and Dalton. Building off the U.S. Department of Energy finding that this project is beneficial to the region and worthy of its support. This legislation simply ensures that New Hampshire evaluates and considers the same for this project so that it may move forward to produce an economic and environmentally benefits expected. If the New Hampshire electric distribution companies determine the project to be of public interest and worthy of its support, they would expect to negotiate long-term transmission agreements with the project and petitions the PUC authorization to recover the related costs through retail rates. The Twin State Clean Energy Link is a widely supported project that will provide 1,200 megawatts of bi-directional transmission capacity, which will allow New Hampshire and New England growing renewable energy industry to export energy to Canada. Did I say export? It did say export. Export energy to Canada during the times of surplus, which is a good thing. The directionality is particularly important for the expected increase in renewable energy and capacity over the next decade and beyond. It will be critical to support SB 307 to ensure that the Twin State Clean Energy Link can provide these and many benefits to New Hampshire for years to come. And just as a side note, I did go to Utah for an energy summit not too long ago, Mr. Chair, and one of the things that they really targeted that nationwide, it's, you can have all the generation you want, but if you have no way of getting it someplace, you have issues. I mean, you can have solar out in the desert, but you still got to transmit the solar into town, and you need transmission lines. And New Hampshire's in really desperate need of transmission lines. We have plenty of generation and a lot of solar projects, wind projects, but we are desperately in need of transmission. So with that, I will close my testimony.
Thank you. Any questions from the committee? Senator Waters.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Mr. Chairman, for bringing this forward. And just a couple of general questions. You know, it is rather remarkable, isn't it, that almost all of the senators have signed, you know, have expressed their support for the Twin State project. Mm-hmm. And, you know, would that suggest to you that, you know, your priority over the last several years of trying to reduce transmission costs and reduce energy costs is really met by this project?
I think it definitely helps, yes.
Yeah. And,
Follow-up?
yeah, if I may. And in terms of, you know, your views of energy policy, isn't it seem awfully important that we really find a way to increase our transmission capacities, to increase really the resilience and the diversity of our energy supply in the states, so we don't get the kind of spikes we did last year with natural gas and other sources?
I think you hit on the resiliency is also definitely a big part of it, and it's, you know, it's multilateral and where you can you transmit. So it's definitely important, and you definitely need to shore up the grid, and this is definitely one way to add to our capacities. Yeah.
And just one more question, if I may, because, you know, I think what you're saying about, you know, you referenced a couple times with me about, you know, the meetings you went to and the issues about transmission. And, you know, wouldn't you say also that it's awfully important to have these agreements be of a length and of a size that can provide some stability as a project like this is developed?
It is, and it really does help with, you know, for long-term planning, and we definitely need to do that. If you cut these contracts a little too short, it's really hard for investors to say, okay, yeah, we want to be part of this. Yeah. And I've had conversations with many in the past where, you know, well, we're going to have to buy up because you can't do these long-term contracts, and that makes it very difficult for us to come up with a solution. People want stability, and they want to be able to count on New Hampshire not flip-flopping one way or the other. So, yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you for the question, Senator.
Yeah.
Further questions? Seeing none?
Thank you.
Thank you. Josh and Dan from DOE. You've come in with that elusive X between the oppose and support lines.
Just over to them. Yeah. Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. For the record, Josh Elliott, Director of the Division of Policy and Programs, New Hampshire Department of Energy. With me, I have Mr. Daniel Phelan, who is our Wholesale Markets Administrator. So the department is neutral on Senate Bill 307 and has a few items that should be considered before passage of this bill, essentially to ensure that ratepayers are protected in these contracts. As was referenced, this project, as far as the department is aware, only the Twin States Clean Energy Connection Link project would be eligible to participate as part of the process that's outlined in the bill. The department was happy to work with the National Grid, the proposer of the project, including letters of support from both the commissioner as well as Governor Sununu in their federal funds application with U.S. DOE. Just like to make it clear, this is funds from U.S. Department of Energy, not New Hampshire Department of Energy. With that, we have identified a couple of areas that Mr. Phelan is going to walk the committee through that we think can strengthen the bill, ensuring that New Hampshire ratepayers aren't disproportionately exposed to risk.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Senators, for the opportunity to speak on this bill. Just one bit of context that I think was missing is that this is a 1,200 megawatt line. That's going to be important for if you did, I missed it, and I apologize. The first piece is that we believe that any agreement entered into under this potential legislation should limit New Hampshire's participation such that it does not pay for a disproportionate share of costs relative to the regional benefit. So New Hampshire represents roughly 10% of the New England energy load. Therefore, we think it's appropriate that New Hampshire only sign up for 10% of this line. Yes, sir.
So how do we do that?
By limiting the size of the agreement to 120 megawatts, roughly 10% of the 1,200 megawatt line. That's our first suggestion, that the size be reduced. Secondly, while I hear the support for a long-term deal, we believe that 40 years is too long and exposes New Hampshire's ratepayers to risk of stranded costs that would not be appropriate for New Hampshire ratepayers to take on. We suggest a term of 20 years, a maximum term of 20 years, as to line up with legislation that was passed last year, known as Senate Bill 54. That agreement also set out a role for long-term contracts for energy, and we see this legislation as written as expanding the role of long-term contracts in New Hampshire's energy mix. Notably because this, in a couple instances, first of all on line 6 and secondly on line 31, the legislation talks about the agreements with or without associated long-term agreements for energy purchases or storage services. Now, our reading of the legislation says that authorizes additional long-term contracts for energy that we believe is outside the scope of this proceeding, and if that should be pursued, it should be done so in a way that is focused on the merits of those long-term contracts themselves. And finally, and perhaps most importantly for our concerns, is that the legislation appears to lack clear criteria for the PUC's approval of an agreement. The section 2, Roman 2 of the Act talks about costs associated with the administration of any agreements and how those should be recovered. We have a couple of issues there. First is that the wording administration seems to imply the administrative costs of the contract. So, the billing, the negotiation contracts, and those are what's referenced just before that term.
How would you change that?
So we would add a new section that allowed for the cost recovery of the agreement itself.
Repeat that one more time?
We would add a new section that allows for the cost recovery of the agreement itself, because we think it's not clear that the current legislation applies to that. And along with that, we would add to the legislation criteria for the PUC to consider while addressing an agreement. And I've provided some examples in written legislation and written testimony that has been passed out here. But brief description, one is that the agreement should not disproportionately burden New Hampshire ratepayers, should provide energy savings, foster price stability, mitigate future investments in transmission and generation, does not unduly induce retirement of baseload resources, and improves system reliability during winter extreme weather events. So we would suggest that those criteria that the PUC be directed to find that any agreement meets those criteria in its approval of these agreements. That concludes our suggestions for this legislation.
Thank you very much for your testimony. Josh, you too?
I don't have anything to add to Mr. Phelan's comments, but I think those list of those criteria that he just spelled out to have the PUC consider are all the things that this committee is concerned about in terms of looking at, okay, why are we doing this project? Why are we doing any of these contracts? Right, is to have some benefit to the ratepayer, and those are the sort of walking through, those are the things that have been clearly identified as concerns, whether it's price, whether it's reliability in the winter, options to either reduce costs in the future, as well as alleviate some of the price swings that we have seen.
Do you think you can encapsulate everything in an amendment, to draft up ones just for consideration when we do execute this?
Yes, the department would be happy to do that.
All right. Questions from the committee? Senator Waters?
Sorry. Oh, did you have some? No. Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. If I may, Mr. Chairman, there's several of these issues I want to walk through on this recommendations about the PUC agreement, so if I could just kind of
Absolutely.
do that. I guess let me start off with a larger question. It's pretty clear that we're in the midst of an enormous energy supply transformation. Offshore wind auctions are next summer, 3.5 gigawatts. We've got to get that transmission in. A lot of the procurement demands coming out of the states to our south and to our north are going to affect transmission, increases in energy efficiency, new technologies like hydrogen and so on. But isn't it the case that it is clear that as this process continues, that we're going to be electrifying larger parts of our economy, and a potential bottleneck for doing that is going to be transmission. So isn't, in the big picture, isn't that really what we're looking at?
So yes, transmission, has benefits in that matter. It's important to look to what the project here. We've got legislation that is supposedly broad, but it really is focused on one project here. So the characteristics of that project matter. And that project is going to link the New England grid to Quebec's grid. And that's not something that is going to allow, different resources along the way to hook in. It's going to be this direct connection to Hydro-Quebec's system. Now, and another portion of this bill is that, per our recommendations, this would not include the power associated with the line. So the power that flows would be subject to market forces, and any benefits would be derived from the economic decisions of the resources.
Well,
Yeah, what I'm trying to get around to in this picture, because certainly the advantage for offshore wind, of course, with this is that it means that we have essentially a huge storage supply capacity in Hydro-Quebec for offshore wind capacity, and that there's a synergy there. And so the bidirectionality may have implications for how we overall increase our energy supply, particularly renewable energies, and the transmission associated with it. But what I'm trying to get at is this: how is it that we can really determine, and that this first bullet, what disproportionately burden actually means, given this transforming system? And, FERC and others they're starting to do 20-year planning instead of 10-year planning on transmission, so that, the recognition that it's going to be hard to see what is state versus regional benefit in some ways because of the nature of the way the system is developing. So how would we know what disproportionately burden even means 10, 20, 30 years from now, let alone today?
Well, it's simply, in our view, the proportion of the line that New Hampshire is signed up for. By increasing New Hampshire's share of the line, we're paying for something that other states are benefiting for, and that cost should be shared regionally. It shouldn't be left to New Hampshire to solve these problems for the entire region.
Thanks. I guess that's what the $400 million from the feds was kind of getting at, but we'll go on. And also, how would one know if an agreement's even for 20 years, how would one know in the PUC be able to determine that there'd be energy market savings throughout the lifetime of the agreement? How would that be possible?
Yep, so we think that the burden of proof should be on the utilities that bring forward this agreement. They should be able to make the case that what they're doing is right for New Hampshire ratepayers. We don't think that we should sit here today for 8 hours and tomorrow for another 8 hours and continue on until we determine here that this agreement gives energy market savings for New Hampshire. But we do think that that question needs to be answered.
Yeah, I just, as I said, I was in the legislature in the House when we thought it was a great idea to put a $400 million scrubber on a certain plant, and I guess that didn't quite work out that way, did it? Anyways, just one more of these bullets before I get to another issue, if I may, Mr. Chair. So what do you mean, what is this unduly induced retirements of baseload resources? I mean, I just say we're in a context where if we don't do this transmission to away from fossil fuels, then bye Hampton anyways. But we are part of a larger picture here, and the investments that are coming through the IRA and so forth. That what is unduly induced retirements? I mean, what can that possibly mean? What is unduly going to mean?
Sure. So I talked earlier about how the benefits of the line are going to flow through the rational economic actions of the entity selling the power. That has market impacts. So the induction or the increase in supply should change things with our supply mix. And I'm going to note that it's not solely fossil resources that we're concerned about here. There's also nuclear resources that are struggling to make ends meet. And the changing in the market dynamics can make things worse for those kinds of resources. So we're concerned about that, and we want that to be addressed.
So the nuclear is struggling to make ends meet. Is it because they don't have transmission to put out their product?
No, it's a function of the unique characteristics of a nuclear unit. You know, it's got extremely large investment requirements that are irregular. You've got licensing issues that other resources don't need to deal with. So a nuclear resource has to make the determination that they can spend a lot of money and get their money back. And it's something that doesn't quite line up perfectly with our markets the way they exist.
But you would agree that we do need more transmission.
For what purpose?
Transmitting.
No, I think, and you know, I think you have to ask for what purpose, because, you know, earlier, transmission costs money, and New England pays some of the highest transmission rates, if not the highest in the country. So these investments are important, but they need to be justified.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just on the last point about Seabrook, I mean, it is licensed to what, 2045 or 50 now? And it's quite likely they'll be doing as other similar plants have done in the last couple of years, another 25 years they'll be asking for. So in terms of the lifetime of this project, Seabrook probably, because of those desire to keep their license for decades and decades to come, feels pretty good about coming. So I think, I'm just trying to get it, I think that this one is a real problem. And if you're going to try to put something together for us to look at, I just think this one is, to me, a little bit impossible. I'd like to just, for a moment, because I know we'll hear from the sponsors of the project more about this. Well, let me just say too, you know, a rational marketplace has kind of created the billions of dollars of costs we're already seeing in our state because of climate issues. and, you know, 440 million alone because of fossil fuels on public health. So, I mean, I don't really think the rational marketplace has done a great job. And I hope we will think about, you know, some other things that seem rational at the time too. But in terms of the desire to kick back from 40 years, you know, again, I think we are on a different, isn't it? I mean, if the premise is that we're entering a different regime in terms of what we're going to be doing to increase energy supply because we're going to electrify, we're going to electrify transportation, we're going to electrify home heating, we're going to electrify a lot of things in our economy, and a lot of states around us are going to be at 100%. You know, I mean, that's their goals, and New Hampshire will do what it does. But, you know, it seems to me that it is not unexpected that we might see these same kinds of durations and sizes when it comes to other energy supplies like offshore wind we're going to be bringing in very, very shortly. So I guess I'm not really sure why these limits, you know, need to be changed from the 240 and the 40.
If you
It comes down to a matter of risk for the ratepayers. How much risk to the ratepayers are you as the committee, you as the legislature willing to do? We think this is disproportionate based on the size of New Hampshire's consumption of electricity across the regional, across ISO New England. This is typically how infrastructure projects, transmission projects are done. They're done by a proportional share of transmission. Makes sense that this is a transmission project that we adhere to that. But it fundamentally comes down to a matter of risk, right? Are we going to transfer that risk onto the ratepayers of New Hampshire?
Yeah,
And do we want, and do we, and as you pointed out, there are benefits, right? This is not a zero-sum game here, right? There are benefits, but as you pointed out, scrubber, there's other situations the legislature has taken action on that ratepayers have ended up eating the costs on pretty big dollar amounts. This is a potential means to reduce that risk without sacrificing benefits.
If I just may follow up on that, you know, I mean, part of our issue about the transmission cost because we have fallen behind our surrounding states on energy efficiency, and that is kind of another issue, but it does point to the fact that how can we know from today what our percentage of the use of the transmission system will be in 10 years, given the, or 20 years, given the growth of the energy demands in our state?
You know, it's speculation, but we can provide reasonable guesses. I'll note that the other New England states have more aggressive electrification goals than New Hampshire. Therefore, as things stand today, our share of regional load should decrease. But that's, you know, something that we aren't going to be able to tell for now. We can do the best with our information today, and that's 10%.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Questions from the committee? So you're okay with 20 years?
We suggest 20 years.
Thank you very much for your testimony. Molly, would you care to come up? It's the kind of guy I am. Make sure your mic's on. Thank you very much.
So I want to, for the record, my name is Molly Connors. I'm with the New England Power Generators Association. We represent more than 90% of the installed generating capacity in New England. That's nearly 30,000 megawatts of generating capacity. In New Hampshire specifically, my members own or operate about 4,300 megawatts of generation capacity. Of that 4,300, about 1,800 megawatts are carbon-free. We employ approximately our members employ approximately 1,500 people here. I have to say, I think I'm here to start challenging some long-held assumptions that we've had regarding energy in New England. For as long as I've been in energy, and before then, Hydro-Quebec was viewed as this home of vast, cheap, environmentally friendly electricity, and all we have to do is just build the transmission line to be able to plug into that. And if only we could just do that, then we would have lower prices, we would have lower carbon emissions. And I think that, you know, in the last the last decade or so, as Senator Waters alluded to, the New England energy system has been going through a lot of changes, as has the energy system in Quebec. If the assumption that HQ had a lot of surplus to share with us was even true, which I don't know that it was, but even if it were true then, I don't think that it's really the case going forward. And for that reason, I'm here to share some reasons why we caution the committee against this particular long-term contract. We know that for a long time, when Quebec has been exporting to New England, it's been during the non-peak parts of the year, the winter and the summer. And what we know now is that Quebec is struggling to meet its own peak demand. And what I have shared with you in terms of the PowerPoint, which I'll get to a little bit, but I won't dwell on it, and 2 news articles sort of illustrate the challenges that Quebec is having now, and we think are a sign of times to come in terms of what we can expect from HQ going forward and how that should inform the decisions that the legislature makes. We know that Quebec is having a hard time meeting its peak demand for many of the same reasons that here in New England, we always find the peak to be a challenge. Quebec, like many New England states, have very aggressive carbon reduction goals. As a result, Quebec, just like the other states in New England, are aggressively electrifying their transportation system, their heating system. At the same time, they have been marketing their allegedly low-cost energy to attract data centers and other types of manufacturing. So as a result, their demand is accelerating at the same pace, if not more than ours. And that's notable because they are a winter peaking system, and we in New England are on track to go from a summer peaking system to a winter peaking system within the next 10 years. So when they need electricity to meet high demand is when we also need electricity for high demand. And this is relevant for points I'll get to in a moment. We know that based on a report that Hydro-Quebec issued itself in 2022, they will be short electricity as early as the winter of 2026. That's a significant date because that's the same date that the Twin States Energy line would begin construction. Again, I'm here to challenge longstanding assumptions. This was not always the case. We always assumed that there was just surplus north of the border. But times are changing in Quebec just as they're changing here in New England. We know from their own strategic report released not that long ago that they will need an additional 5,000 megawatts of electricity to meet their own peak within the next 5 years. I'm sorry, that date's wrong, but within the next 10, I think. It's not clear yet where Canada will get that power from. We believe they've issued RFPs, but it's not clear yet what their power supply will be. And so we know that and I will also note that I see the chair has a question.
Yeah, we'll be able to transmit electricity up to them as well, won't we?
That's a really good point. And it's something I also wanted to raise, which is that Twin States is saying we're going to be this big fat battery for all of your offshore wind. And implied in that is that they need the export from us. They're saying, well, we're going to send you all our power, and that's going to stabilize rates, and that's going to lower your carbon emissions. But they're also saying we need your power in order to shore up our reservoirs because we want to not make our own electricity. We want to shore up our reservoirs so that we have enough in the winter. They can't export to us in the winter unless we export to them. I know I'm being...
My little squirrels are going.
Right. So if HQ could meet our energy demand, they wouldn't need our exports. They're banking on offshore wind, which is not even realistically going to be commercial until at least 2031, except for one offshore wind farm, which I'm proud to say is a NEPCA member.
But it seems to me, from what I'm hearing from on national level, the transmission seems to be one of the needs that we need.
That's also a really great point that I've been hearing. To me, as an electricity person, a transmission system is like a road. A transmission line is a road. And so, yeah, highway, the big ones, highways. The kind of line that you're talking about here is like a highway, right? Really big. You need to know that there's a product at the end of the road. And what we're saying is if you look at where HQ is right now, we don't know that they're going to have the electricity to send over the road. And I would say, and should I pause or can I expand a little bit?
No, go ahead. I'm
Right.
just trying for our committee as well.
Yeah,
And
and-
there's some new members too that have not
Well, I think-
experienced this elaborate.
Of course, it's notable that ISO New England did a study, and again, I can follow up with whatever you guys need after, but ISO New England has done a study called the 2050 Transmission Study, and they build in some assumptions like what lines will we have in service, what power plants will be in service, and they look at the forecasted load growth just in New England. And they say, what do we need to do for the transmission system in New England in order to meet our forecasted increased demand for electricity? And the numbers for that, I was just looking it up, are enormous. They are cumulative cost to upgrade the transmission system related just to the reliability projects from increased electricity. The ISO is saying could be $17 billion to $26 billion. All right, and that's for the reliable stuff happening just in New England. And we're talking about subsidizing a $1.72 billion line where we don't even know if the electricity can come.
Interesting. You know, I have a cleaning company. And I was doing a flood job.
I was a cleaning lady too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was doing a flood job in Massachusetts, and lo and behold, 2 o'clock in the morning, I'm having a conversation with somebody from ISO. I said, hey, by the way, did you know I'm a senator? And I do energy. And I says, you know, one of the things that's an issue is transmission. And he goes, exactly. You need transmission. And I'm thinking, small world. But it was on the top of his list. And I thought, okay, I'm on the right track here. Now we heard testimony from the department saying, well, you know, you limit the contract to 20 years and maybe have 10% interest in it. What are your thoughts about that?
I mean, I have to disclose that my members don't get contracts for anything. We would love a 20-year contract for a fixed price and all of our capital costs that we could just get off the backs of the ratepayers, but we don't have that. So to me, the time of the contract is kind of moot. I think the underpinning is that you're going to build a multi-billion-dollar line to Canada, and the assumption is that there's going to be cheap energy available at any given time for ratepayers here in New Hampshire. And I just have to say that assumption cannot be relied on anymore. And I have the data to go through that if you want, but I'm happy to answer questions too.
Absolutely. And I've been hogging all the time. Do you have any questions?
I'm listening.
Okay.
Okay.
That's a no.
And again, I go to say, I think we're challenging long-held assumptions. I think that these are, if this is news to you, I think it's because it's been an education for all of us in New England. So I could refer to you the charts if you want. So I want to refer to slide 3 of the handout that I brought. And, you know, I think it's been illustrative in the last couple of years, really the last 18 months, where the challenges that HQ is having at the other end of the line, again, these are challenges that they have already publicized and brought to their electorate, are what we see as sort of the base case going forward. And it's really critical that we talk about winter, because we know that winter is when we have unique reliability challenges. and that the fuel prices around winter are what often drive fuel spikes. So, and energy cost spikes. So I really want to focus on winter right now, and I want to talk about what I call a tale of two cold snaps. So if you look at slide 3, you might recall, although it must seem like forever ago, that we had a very, very cold Christmas last year. And as a matter of fact, we kind of lucked out in New England. We had rough weather, but compared to other parts of the country, in particular upstate New York, southern Canada, they went through sort of a storm that was so large it sort of covered half the continent. And as a result, in Quebec, they had increased demand for electricity, largely because of the heat. And at the same time, they had one of their transmission lines trip off. And, you know, anyone can have a bad day. It's understandable that, you know, sometimes your equipment fails. But the context in which this failure happened is pretty significant, because here in New England, we were also experiencing that cold weather. So our generators, some of the older ones, were having trouble running. And so within New England, we had a shortage. Our generators some of them weren't able to come on in time. Because the trip happened so suddenly, they didn't have notice. Some of them struggled with the cold. So here in New England, we were experiencing a little bit of system stress. And just as we were experiencing that stress more acutely because the sun set, so demand increases after sunset here, we started seeing our peak. And right around then is when HQ tripped off. Right as people were gathering for Christmas Eve gatherings, right? And so again, this is not in particularly something that only would happen in HQ, but the timing is acute because it underscores how dependent we are on them already. And again, we're thinking about expanding our dependence on them. I would like to go to the next slide, which also talks about a different, but I think of a more interesting story. In February 3rd and 4th of last year, we hit record colds, I remember, because I had to take my dog out and it was wretched. And in Quebec, they were all, you know, they just experienced in the winter what we experienced, but worse, right? They were having they actually had record-breaking cold, and they hit their all-time peak demand for electricity. Because remember, they're a winter peaking system. And under those circumstances, the lines are bidirectional. The phase 2 line is already bidirectional, so a lot of the lines that come into New England from Quebec have the capability of sending power to Quebec. At the start of the peak on February 3rd, we began sending over 1,000 megawatts north to Canada, just so that they could meet their peak demand in the winter. But I want to direct your attention to slide 5 now, which is to say that the concerns that we have are not limited to the winter. This summer, again, during a holiday week, we went into some concerns regarding reliability. And on that day, HQ had promised to send about 680 megawatts of electricity to New England, only to cut it off during the winter peak. During the evening peak. And so what we're seeing is that when HQ is struggling, we are probably struggling too. And I will direct your attention to one of the news articles that we shared. It was printed a little, I apologize to say, the printout didn't come out very well, but the substance of the article is there. It's a Montreal Gazette article in which the energy minister makes a speech in which he says, here in Quebec, we have to make hard choices. We need to use more energy efficiency. We need to find cheaper sources of electricity, because we know that we are scheduled to go into a shortfall in 2026. And we will honor our existing contracts to Massachusetts and New York. But he does not talk about expanding those contracts any further. As it is, he's telling his electorate, and again, HQ is a Crown-owned corporation. The government owns HQ. And I can't think of any price or any penalty that they would pay in order to cut off their own people in order to supply us. And so he's saying we're going to have hard choices. It's going to be a little tight, belt buckle tightening going on. And I just, and so again, I caution this committee as we look forward to challenge the assumptions we've had that there is abundant supply at the end of this transmission line. And I want to end on two notes, and I'm happy to answer questions. But there's two things that I sort of want to highlight in terms of the bulk electric system. And as you know, ISO New England is the entity responsible for reliable operation of the electric grid in New England. There's two things. One is that every year, ISO New England holds an auction. And it's called the Forward Capacity Auction. You might have heard of it, but I don't like to get bogged down in jargon. But every year they hold this auction, and the people the generators and the power lines that compete, all of the resources that compete in this auction, agree to be available on call 24/7, 3 years in the future. So the most recent auction was in February of 2023. And all of the resources that were picked in that auction agree to be on call 24/7 if there is a reliability challenge in New England. For the first time in the history of those auctions, and there have been 18, HQ was not a winner. HQ did not clear in that auction, which means that in 2026, they will not be required by ISO New England to serve on demand going forward for that year. That is HQ showing us where they're putting their money, and it is not in New England. The second thing I want to highlight, which also goes to ISO New England, or at least the bulk electric system and reliability, is that everything ISO New England and the grid does is done in accordance with very strict reliability standards, including those set out by NERC, the North American Electric Reliability Corporation. And so one of the cardinal rules is that you always need to have enough power plants online to meet demand, right, at any given time. But you also need to have resources ready to go within 10 minutes in case something breaks on the system or something goes wrong. Because we know everyone has a bad day, right? And so when ISO New England has something go wrong on the system, they dip into their reserves. And that's just a sign. It's not necessarily the end of the world. It's sort of how you run the grid, but it's a sign that your system is under stress. We consider these stress conditions because at that given moment, you're kind of tight. It means that you're dipping into your reserves. We've had 3 such conditions. We call them capacity shortage conditions. We've had 3 such conditions in New England in 6 years. 2 of the 3 were immediately precipitated by HQ cutting off its supplies to us. And so again, I know I've thrown a lot at you. I know that I'm challenging long-held assumptions, but I think that's one of the fun parts about electricity, frankly, is that we're in such dynamic times that we have to challenge the assumptions that we've had. And it's not me coming in and making scurrilous accusations about HQ. It's HQ's own strategic report and under operating assumption that they're going to be 5,000 megawatts short in the given future, right at the same time that they are promising to have low carbon energy ready for us. I'm happy to take any questions.
A crabby question.
I love a crabby question.
Okay. New England Power Generators, are they in competition with HQ?
A subsidiary of HQ is one of my members.
Okay, just wanted to know.
No, so I mean, that's a very fair question. And I think it's worth noting, and this is a sore spot for my members because sore spot's too strong, but when our power plants within the region take on the obligation to be available 24/7, they face very stiff performance penalties. I would direct your attention to slide 3, which was the December 24th storm. As a result of their non-performance, my members paid roughly $30 million in performance penalties. HQ was not subject to the same penalty. They paid some penalty, but our members are expected to be held to a higher, more stringent, more expensive standard.
All right, I hogged it all. Any questions from the committee? Senator Waters.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Thank you. In that period last December to February, what was the price of natural gas?
Do I have it on the slide, sir? It was so high that in those circumstances, oil was setting the price and the natural gas plants weren't necessarily running.
Yeah. And second question, were there any plants during that period last year when it was so cold of our generating plants that had to shut down?
Yeah, that's what the $30 million fee was for, or the penalty. Everyone has a bad day. And I'll note that I think it's openly understood that when natural gas is more expensive than oil and oil plants are running, the oil plants are older. By and large, the oil plants are older. So I don't think that was a surprise to everyone.
Why was the gas more expensive?
This goes back to our capacity challenges regarding natural gas.
Nice.
Right. It's because when everyone's using, because there is a finite number of natural gas pipelines that come into New England. On really cold days, home heating gets priority, and the natural gas power plants have to pay more to access it. So you have the same amount of gas going through the pipelines, but what's left over for the power plants is smaller and smaller, so the price gets higher and higher. And so it becomes so expensive for the natural gas plants to buy gas that they're priced out of the wholesale electricity markets, and other stored fuels like oil, coal are actually less expensive.
Thank you for your testimony. Questions from the committee? Seeing none, well done. Good job.
I appreciate your time. Thank you.
Absolutely. Kirsten Koch with the BIA is in support but doesn't want to speak. Let's see. Who do I want? Mike Licata, are you here? Come on in. Ambivalent. He's in the middle of the rotor right now. Maybe we can persuade you one way or the other.
Good morning. Michael Licata representing Eversource Energy. As the chair pointed out, we are neutral on the legislation before you today. Do appreciate the opportunity to testify. Just a couple of thoughts. Really, the purpose for me speaking is twofold. One, just to explain briefly, the role of the electric distribution utility in the legislation, and really to maybe respond to a couple of comments from the DOE and answer any questions that the committee may have about that role. So under the bill as introduced, electric distribution utilities like Eversource are required to review and respond to proposals offered to them by transmission developers pursuant to being selected by the US DOE. So that is a requirement that the EDC, Electric Distribution Utility, does have. Within 3 months of receiving a proposal, we have to review that and respond. If the electric distribution utility finds that it's a good proposal, if we think that it would benefit our customers and it has a good opportunity, good chance of getting approval by the Public Utilities Commission, it would be found in the public interest, then within 3 months after that, we would file with the PUC for approval. And at that point, it's really in the hands of the regulator and other stakeholders to determine, is the proposal that the electric distribution utility putting forth, which is based on the proposal offered by the transmission developer, is that in the public interest? And so many of the discussion points about costs and benefits and long-term risk and potential of stranded costs, that would be the venue for those discussions, and the regulator would weigh in and ultimately make a determination whether the benefits would be worth the risks. So that's how the EDC would engage in this. Just a couple of observations from the DOE's testimony. One, as we read the legislation, it could include energy and storage services. And if it included energy and storage services, that would be subject to review by the PUC and be a part of the filing that the electric distribution utility would make. I think the DOE, if I heard correctly, their interpretation was that would be a separate process. We view this as not necessarily, that if the transmission developer included essentially energy as part of their proposal, it could be included as part of the proposal and review that would be submitted to the Public Utilities Commission. And that's notable because obviously a lot of the benefits associated with a transmission services agreement, as was discussed, flow from the energy that's coming through those lines and the effects on reducing the market or a power purchase agreement with customers. And then just the second item, the DOE indicated that they wanted some changes or clarification around the cost recovery. We're happy to work with them and discuss that. We do feel it's fairly clear in the bill today. So Roman 2, which starts on line 24, talks about the costs associated with the administration of agreements shall be recovered pursuant to RSA 374F12.3, which is just the next section. I think there, if I heard correctly, their concerns center around the word administration, exactly what that means. But I think when you read the next section, Roman 3, it's pretty detailed on what we're doing with the transmission service agreement and how those costs are recovered. So if there's additional clarification that needs to occur, again, we're happy to engage on that. We do feel like this is fairly clear, but again, we obviously want to get that piece right. With that, I'm happy to answer any questions that the committee may have.
Thank you, Michael. Senator Waters.
Thank you. And so, Mike, could you, offer to us, maybe not now, but there's the bullets there about some of the criteria that DOE is, and if you can comment on it if you want, but otherwise maybe you could provide us your take on those. So you heard my questions about them.
Yeah, I wasn't able to write fast enough as the DOE is testifying, but I would very much, as you might imagine, we would like to review those criteria and we would absolutely offer comment.
Thank you. And so there are other concerns about the 240 and the 40, and I wonder about your sense. I mean, looking at the industry, not just in Eversource's region, but around the country, what other states and what, from a utility perspective, what your take is on whether or not those parameters of the 240 and 40 are unduly risky for ratepayers?
Yeah, so I'll just back up. One of the reasons we're neutral on the bill is this is a public policy determination, right, of the legislature of whether they want to, even though this is enabling, provide this, direction to the EDCs, to transmission developers, and to the Public Utilities Commission that you have an interest in supporting these types of transmission projects. And certainly, Eversource, you've heard me in the past talk about the need for additional supply into the region, the wintertime price issues. So we're certainly supportive of legislation and public policy efforts to address, in particular, that winter supply issue. So, just on and I think others behind me can testify to this and confirm. I think the thought process behind the 240 megawatts is it actually aligns with the PPA bill that you passed last year, Senate Bill 54. So I think they were trying to align the transmission capacity with the allowable energy that could be procured through that. I also note that it's shall not exceed, so it's not necessarily a requirement that you're procuring 240 megawatts. That's the ceiling, not the floor. And then on the length of the agreement, I'm certainly understand the DOE's concerns. I would just say, transmission projects are certainly significant investments. Takes a long time to sort of recover costs. So I think in terms of industry standard of cost recovery and supporting a long-term project like a transmission project, I don't think that's an uncommon number.
Really?
And just to clarify, just to emphasize that point you made, that these are ceilings, not floors, so that, really, whether it's 120 or 240, in either case, the PUC would make a determination. I mean, utility would bring in a number, and PUC make a determination whether or not the risk was a problem. So it really is enabling. It's not saying that it has to come in and we have to be on the hook for it. It just says that the PUC can consider up to 240. Isn't that the case? And same thing with the 40 years. I mean, it's you know, if there's reasons why other states are doing that.
That's my reading of the bill as well.
Okay. Thank you.
Senator Pearl with a question.
Thank you. Good to see you again. So over the summer, I sat on a study committee looking at small-scale nuclear and the development of that. And, you know, we're not there yet, obviously, but we do have things like that in the works, and we have, you know, the offshore wind projects. When you guys are looking forward 10, 20, 30, 40 years in your planning, obviously our load in use is going to change and increase. We all predict that. How do you factor in projects like the offshore wind and the small scale nuclear and what we need for transmission lines?
Yeah, it's a great question. So we do.
That was an excellent question.
We're all done here. You know, when we do our long-term planning, you know, and transmission is the longest of the long-term planning. You know, we're making a 10-year load forecast of what we see in terms of historic usage of our customers, industry trends, you know, predictions on economic activity. So certainly there are a number of drivers in that. You know, electrification, people buying electric vehicles. Just think about 5 years ago versus today. How many more electric vehicles you see on the road? The electrification of the heating systems as well. More and more people are purchasing heat pumps. You know, you get air conditioner, you get heating in the winter. It's more efficient, and so we look at those trends in our planning, and we really do it on a quite a granular level of, you know, specific areas, and then we look at the infrastructure, starting with the distribution system level infrastructure, and work our way back. So, you know, the lines that serve customers, going to the feeders that come out of the substations themselves, and then the transmission system. So that evaluation is really how we you know, determine investments in our system. As a distribution and transmission company, we're really focused on the transmission infrastructure and distribution infrastructure. We are not focused on generation. So we don't own generation, we don't plan for the generation. That really is the purview, as Ms. Connor said, of ISO New England to look at, you know, system capacity, system availability, you know, what fuels are available, how offshore wind, you know, what their predictions are, which certainly, you know, are different today than they were, say, 3-4 years ago, when that will be arriving. So I hope that helps. I'm not trying to sort of kick the can to the ISO, but in terms of supply for the region, they're really the ones who are focused on that.
Well, yeah. I guess more of my question is, do those factor in? Because obviously with the small scale nuclear especially, it's going to be a user that's going to be fairly large, and it's more of those, might be an AI center or something like that. There, you know, that seems to be where many of, or a large manufacturing facility. But I mean, those are kind of the trends that are going to be our big increases, our users like that, at least it seems to me. All the things you talked about, you know, the conversion of electric vehicles and electric heat, those will certainly add to it as well. I guess I'm just curious how your company viewed looking at that. I mean, this whole conversation is about, we have electrons here and we need to move them to there. And if, as we see some of these larger facilities come on and produce their own, they may also come into the mix of having a little bit they need to move, which is going to require the services of companies like yours.
Absolutely. And so just like any generator, both large or small, you know, they would reach out to us, they would inform us of their plans. We would do an interconnection study to determine, you know, are there upgrades that we need to do to the electric system in that area to accommodate either additional load or additional generation coming on our system. So we would absolutely evaluate that when it occurred.
One more quick one.
Really?
I guess my real question is, how do you forecast that? We're talking about, you know, is 40 years too long in this contract or 20? How do you forecast what's coming for use and generation in situations like that as technology changes?
Yeah, we rely on as I said, is sort of industry trends in terms of what models are available to us, from third parties, the ISO being one of them, that forecast both load growth and generation growth, where that might occur. And so, part of it is no one has a crystal ball. These are, 10-year forecasts that we're developing that are subject to change, but it is a marker for us to do our capital planning. So, we have our internal evaluations that we do, but in large part, those can be based on, those third-party evaluations as well, the ISO being probably the most significant.
I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
You can have another one.
No, it's okay. We'd be getting into a long public policy conversation.
Senator Bristol, any questions? Okay. Thank you, Michael, appreciate it. And we have another ambivalent one who didn't sign whether in support or not, but I would like Matthew Fossum to come up. Matthew, welcome. We're definitely gonna have to have a middle-of-the-road box here. And you're with the New Hampshire OCA.
Yes, Senator. Good morning. Well, first, for the record, my name is Matthew Fossum. I'm the Director of Regional and Federal Affairs for the New Hampshire Office of Consumer Advocate. So I'm here this morning on behalf of that office and our constituents, the residential utility customers in the state. And yes, I didn't check a support or oppose because the OCA is essentially taking a position very similar, I think, to what you've heard this morning already from the Department of Energy, and so I won't burn up a lot of your time going over that. What I do want to take a moment to raise, though, are a couple of items that are of particular concern to our office, just to make sure that they are factored into any of the considerations as this bill might move forward. And the first and I guess biggest item from our perspective is it's not entirely clear to us from reading the legislation why it is that our electric distribution utilities are buying transmission capacity. This is a product that's not clear that they need, and the bill seems to recognize that they neither need it nor will use it. Section 3 requires them to immediately resell the capacity that they purchase to third parties in a manner to minimize cost and maximize benefit. So it's not clear to us. We're hoping to learn as this bill goes on why it is that the distribution utilities are being sort of used, if you will, as a middleman in this process. Maybe there's good policy reason for it, but at the moment, it's a little cloudy to us.
Could you repeat that one more time?
Certainly. The way the bill is constructed in our reading is that, as Mr. Licata pointed out, the transmission developer would go to the distribution utility and make an offer. The distribution utility would do a review of that offer. Assuming that they think it's worthwhile, they would present it to the Public Utilities Commission. If the Public Utilities Commission agrees that it's a worthwhile offer and it has certain benefits, they would approve that contract. That is a contract that must be for transmission capacity, could also be for energy or storage, but it must be for transmission capacity. But the bill then requires the distribution utility to, and I'll quote, to sell such services and associated energy to third parties in a manner to minimize cost and maximize benefit. So having gone through that whole process to review a solicitation, get it approved, and through the Public Utilities Commission, the ultimate end product is that they just resell that transmission capacity as soon as they buy it. And it's not clear to us why that process is necessary or why it's maybe better or preferable to some other process. Perhaps, it's not, anyway, it's just not clear to us at the moment why that process as opposed to some other process for securing transmission capacity into the region is sensible. Mm-hmm. Beyond that, I'll just, I think, hit very quickly two other items. One is the OCA agrees with of the Department of Energy that customers in New Hampshire should not be required to bear a disproportionate share of any transmission capacity or other items that might come through this contracting process, assuming it goes forward. New Hampshire does use about 10% of the regional load. That 10% has been within a percent or two fairly steady for a very long time. And I take Senator Waters' point that, you know, electrification will be increasing, changing, there will be new resources coming on, new uses, all of that will change, but it won't just change for New Hampshire, it will change for the region. We'll all go up in some usage, energy efficiency will drive us all down to some degree.
The negawatts.
I don't personally see that 10% changing in any huge margin over the course of the next, 20 or so years. But that's my personal view. And lastly, the last issue that I'll bring up is that the way that the legislation is presently written, on line 4, it notes that one or more of the distribution utilities may enter into these agreements. And then down on line 12, it limits each one to its pro rata share. So if all 3 of the state's major IOU, investor-owned utilities, enter into contracts, then you can divide up their pro rata shares. But if it's only 2 of them, say, then the pro rata shares would seem to shift. Or if in the end it's only 1, what's a pro rata share of 1? So that item I think needs to be clarified so that there's no risk that you end up with 1 or 2 companies bearing potentially a disproportionate measure of costs. At the end of the day, as I'm sure this committee is very familiar with the consumer advocate, Mr. Crease, and he is very fond of pointing out, at the end of the day, there's one wallet in the room, the New Hampshire end user consumer, and we want to make sure that they get a fair and appropriate deal and that their interests are protected.
Thank you for your testimony.
Thank you.
Questions from the committee? Seeing none. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
How am I doing? Good, nice and slow. All right, good. I didn't drink all my coffee, so I'm not going too fast. All right, Heather McGrail, who supports but is ambivalent whether she wants to speak or not. No, gotcha. Okay, that's a no. Thank you. All right. There's a Sam Evans Brown here. Welcome.
Thank you for the opportunity. For the record, I'm Sam Evans Brown with Clean Energy New Hampshire. I'll try to be quick.
Thank you.
There are a couple points I want to make just in response to the folks that we've heard. We do have written testimony that we'll submit. To the OCA's comments of why do this through distribution rates, just to provide a little bit of historical context, we have not built an inter-regional transmission line since the 90s, since Phase 2 was built to Hydro-Quebec. It is incredibly difficult to build anything that spans 2 regions. When you're building transmission infrastructure within a region, there's a mechanism for doing that. We socialize those costs amongst all of the states based on the percentage of their load. There's a process for doing that. There does not exist a mechanism to build power lines like these ones, which is a key challenge that FERC, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, has identified and is working on, but they're doing it at the speed of the FERC, which is to say not terribly quickly. And so if we want this project to get built, we need to invent the mechanism. One does not exist. So I think while there might be discussion about is there a better way to do this than through distribution rates, it's important to point out that if you say you can't do it through distribution rates, what you're really saying is we're not going to provide a mechanism for building this thing. The discussion of winter issues. It is true that Hydro-Quebec is likely not going to be the resource that solves our winter reliability problems in New England, but it's also worth pointing out that this body, the New Hampshire General Court, passed Senate Bill 54 last year that is a procurement bill that had language specific to winter reliability, specific to extreme weather events built into it. And it's also worth noting that that's the reason we have winter reliability issues is because it's a really hard problem to solve. There aren't obvious resources, low-cost resources that are available at those times, and so that's why we have the issue to begin with. And so, sure, it might be true that Hydro-Quebec is not going to be the panacea that solves that problem, but I don't think that we're necessarily looking to them to do that. We're looking to them to save us money on our electric bills generally. I think personally that the idea that we should limit the size of an agreement to 10% seems arbitrary. That what's enabled in this bill is flexibility. And so to put it this way, if it is found at the Public Utilities Commission that a transmission service agreement is beneficial to New Hampshire ratepayers, why would we limit that benefit to 10% if we could have a larger benefit? This does not say you must enter into an agreement that is up to the maximum size. It provides the state flexibility so that if there is more benefit found, we can procure more of that benefit for our ratepayers. So then to the last point, the idea that there's not enough capacity in Quebec to meet New England's demands. There is and the idea that Hydro-Quebec, we don't know where the additional capacity in Quebec is going to come from. Hydro-Quebec has publicly available plans. You can look to see how they're going to meet their needs. They have 8 to 9 gigawatts of planned capacity additions. Some of that capacity is just coming from efficiency. Just using their resource more efficiently means they'll have more to sell to New England. They're adding 1,500 to 1,700 megawatts of terrestrial wind that, again, because Hydro-Quebec's a giant battery, that wind, while variable, will be firmed up by their reservoirs and can be sold down when needed. They're also, just by replacing aging turbines in their dams, are going to add between 3.8 and 4.2 gigawatts of capacity just by using their existing dams more efficiently. And notable, because I found this really interesting when I went to Hydro-Quebec, I was always told that solar and batteries were unlikely to be beneficial up there because it's so far north. They're actually now looking at adding up to 1 gigawatt of solar and storage on their grid as well, which just shows how much the solar industry has advanced as well. So to sum up, we at Clean Energy New Hampshire are supportive of this bill. I don't think that New England gets to a clean energy economy without more interregional transmission. It's an incredibly difficult thing to do to build interregional transmission. There are a lot of incumbent interests, which you've heard about today, that push back. And also there aren't mechanisms in place to create it. So this is, in our view, a really important bill to pursue. And I've been quoted in the press saying this, so I'll say it again. If New Hampshire can't permit this project, which has, in my mind, the minimum possible impact of a transmission project of this size, I don't know what we can permit. So it seems like a reasonable step to take, in my opinion.
Thank you for your testimony. Questions from the committee? Seeing none. Thank you, Sam. All right. So, all right, Joe? Is there more than one Joe? Joe Casey. I saw 2 heads go up. With the IBEW. Welcome.
Thank you. Good morning, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. My name is Joe Casey. I'm a business development rep for the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers. Our members build, construct, support, maintain transmission, distribution, power generation, all throughout the country. I am the international business development representative, as I said. I'm also a former business manager, Local 490 here in Concord, New Hampshire. And I wish to express my support for SB 307. This legislation enable new clean energy projects like the Twin State Clean Energy Project, 1,200 megawatt bidirectional transmission line, which supports clean dispatchable power between New England and Canada, which will lower carbon emissions, reduce customers' utility bills, create jobs and revenues, while having a minimal environmental or visual impacts for our communities. As representative for the IBEW Second District, which is all of the New England states that participate in the ISO grid, I'm happy to see the critical clean energy transmission projects like Twin State advance, and many benefits that can come for the New Hampshire community's workforce and the electric customers. My organization has over 350 members, 350,000 members trained in various phases of electrical construction technology. We are self-funded, national certified program, and in the job training industry. Collectively, the IBEW provides qualified world-class manpower for 14,000 electrical contractors across the United States and Canada. This legislation enables federally selected projects like Twin States, which has been selected through a competitive process nationwide, to bring cost and carbon reduction benefits to the customers in New Hampshire. We support this bill because we believe in bringing badly needing savings for our working families, energy bills, and provide opportunities for our members. The IBEW, along with its contractor partners, supported this bill in advance because our support for a project of this scale begins with permitting and continues through the superior job site performance committed by our members through the IBEW's Code of Excellence. Twin States, specifically as critical infrastructure, will boost New Hampshire jobs and ratepayer savings. The independent market report submitted as part of the Twin State project by the U.S. DOE projects over $8 billion in energy market savings for all New England customers in just the first 12 years of operation, with New Hampshire customers' share of the savings of over around $800 million in the same period. The report also projects 17.5 million metric tons of carbon emissions reductions over the same period. This is a win-win for creating New Hampshire jobs, supporting clean energy economy for generations to come, enabling other important opportunities for our state. SB 307 will provide a necessary pathway to ensure New Hampshire can see all the benefits of these clean energy projects. Thank you for your time. That concludes my testimony.
Thank you for your testimony. Questions from the committee? Appreciate it.
Thanks, John.
And our final speaker will be a tag team. Taryn Hill and Tim Brennan, if you want to both come up from National Grid.
Thank you.
Welcome, gentlemen. And hit your mic, please. All right.
Hello, my name is Taran Hill, Clean Energy Development Director for National Grid. I'm here this morning with my colleague, Tim Brennan, to testify in support of SB 307. We provide the committee with background information on this legislation and how it will advance federally selected projects like the Twin States Clean Energy Link and help deliver savings, carbon reduction, and community benefits for New Hampshire. National Grid has a long history in the Granite State. We operate the existing Phase 2, 2,000 megawatt HVDC interconnector, which studies show when energy is flowing across that interconnector, it reduces energy costs megawatt hour by roughly 10%. We will be happy to answer questions the committee might have. New Hampshire has been New England's leader on the Twin States Clean Energy Link, with strong support from Governor Sununu, Senators Jeanine Shaheen, Maggie Hassan, Congresswoman Annie Cluster, and Congressman Chris Pappas, New Hampshire Department of Energy, and a majority of state senators, many route communities, and the business community, among others. Thanks to your support, the United States Department of Energy selected, through a competitive process, Twin States, a 1,200 megawatt new bidirectional capacity for the flow of clean energy between New England and Canada, which will help to advance renewable energy developments here in New Hampshire and across New England, including, importantly, offshore wind. The project also won formal support from the states of Massachusetts, Connecticut, and Rhode Island because of the benefits that it would deliver to all of New England. SB 307 is an enabling legislation because it creates a pathway for transmission service agreements by New Hampshire electric distribution utilities with the developer of any New England transmission project which has been awarded a grant or enter into transmission capacity contracts with the United States Department of Energy. This bill enables New Hampshire to contract with flexibility in mind, including language allowing for up to 240 megawatts of capacity to deliver benefits to its customers. Of course, if the state capacity needs are less, the bill also allows for this flexibility. Second, the bill calls for up to 40-year agreements, but again, with flexibility built into the bill, which is designed to deliver maximum cost savings to customers in New Hampshire. As a matter of course, the bill will require New Hampshire utilities to evaluate federally selected projects, and if they determine, as our data shows, that the project will deliver savings to and benefits for grant staters, to advance a process with the PUC. In short, we believe this bill is drafted to maximize benefits for New Hampshire electric customers and will enable advancement of new clean energy transmission, which is vital to our energy future. Relative to the Twin States Clean Energy Link, specifically, this project will benefit from this legislation. And New Hampshire itself is unique among the 6 New England states because it will realize a vast majority of the benefits from this project. New England faces a critical shortage of clean, reliable resources that will enable its states to meet the ambitious carbon emission goals over the next several decades. Filling this need requires both local sources of renewable energy, such as solar and offshore wind, along with clean hydropower from Canada, which can serve to balance the regional power load. However, moving clean energy from Canada to New England grid requires significant new transmission capacity, helping to diversify and increase resiliency in New England's grid. An independent market assessment shows that Twin States will create annual average energy market savings of $68 million in New Hampshire per year over its first 12 years in operation. Utilities can offer additional savings to customers by directly contracting for capacity over Twin States, thus locking in costs for affordable electricity. As a bidirectional line, Twin States will enable energy producers in New England, such as offshore wind, to export excess capacity to Quebec during times of lower regional demand. During the construction period, Twin States is also projected to contribute an annual average of $48 million to New Hampshire, respectively, to state GDP during this period. Twin States will also provide each host community within the state with significant increases in property tax revenue and lease payments to the state for sections where the line is buried along New Hampshire DOT rights-of-way. In addition to benefits to ratepayers, host communities, and GDP growth, National Grid and our nonprofit partner, Citizens Energy, will be assembling community benefits programs totaling more than $100 million to New Hampshire towns and cities along the route. I want to thank you again for your time and consideration. This legislation will help Twin States move forward to produce the economic and environmental benefits expected throughout New Hampshire and across the region. And with that, we'll be happy to take any questions.
And maybe if I could, I'll just add a little bit more, because I think it'd be helpful on the bidirectional capability and the benefits that we mentioned of over $8 billion over the first 12 years of the operation. From the discussions this morning or some of the comments, and I think it's understandable, people might first think, oh, a 1200 line to Canada, the benefits that you're talking about are dependent on 1200 megawatts flowing from Canada to New England most of the time. You know, we have an example of that with the NECC line in Maine that has a firm contract, 8760 of over 1,000 megawatts coming to New England. This bidirectional proposal and the benefits that we had to model, and which came out of an independent market modeling that we had to submit with our DOE application, was not dependent or assuming that type of a use of the line. Instead, it was assuming that when prices are low in New England, and when prices are low in New England, especially as we move out and get 68% renewable penetration as we start heading out towards 2040, you're going to have lots of renewable clean energies looking to produce, but perhaps constrained down. You probably heard about negative pricing. At that time, they'll be trying to outbid each other. They'll even pay to stay generating because they can produce renewable energy certificates, which have value. It's at that time that the model predicts and it would make sense that we would have an export going to Canada. Now, all of a sudden, those renewable resources wind's blowing great, but the load's just not high enough in New England. Now, all of a sudden, you increase the load in effect through an export to Canada. Those generators can not only produce higher, but prevent being shut off. So you're sending that excess clean energy some of the time up to Canada. The model showed that that same energy over, let's say, the course of the year on average, that same energy and even a little more would want to come back during high prices in New England. Remember, at those higher prices, you're at the steeper slope of the demand curve, higher load, and you're running dirtier energy on the margin. So that's the perfect time, makes sense both for New England and for Canada to want to send it back at those times of higher prices. And in the modeling that we did, I think if you think of that line flowing all the time like I first started with, that would be over 10.5 million megawatts a year if you assumed every hour. The net effect of our modeling predicted results of sending it north at low prices, sending it back at high prices in New England, 3 terawatt hours roughly going north, 4 million, terawatt hours is a million megawatt hours, so I'm switching back and forth, but 3 million terawatt hours going north, imports to New England about 4. So it's really only, those numbers that we predicted were only based on a net import to New England of not 10.5 terawatt hours, but over 1 terawatt hour. So that's a very different understanding of how this line could potentially be used and still achieve the $8 billion or more benefits to New England, as well as the 17.5 million metric tons just from that use of the line. So there's no worry about, does Canada have all this excess power? We could argue that back and forth. Will they want to send it at this time or that time? We're not counting on a lot of excess energy coming in to get these benefits that have been projected. And furthermore, if you want to try to assure certain flows with trigger prices along the lines of what our model predicts, that's why the legislation allows consideration of something that could assure that through an energy storage agreement between the EDCs and Hydro-Quebec, for example.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for your testimony. Questions from the committee?
Yeah.
Senator Waters.
And thank you. Thanks for explaining this earlier to us and today. It's much appreciated. And just a kind of basic procedural question. I think you've been here. You've heard some of the issues that the DOE has around the the bullet points there about how the benefits to New Hampshire customers would be understood by the PUC, and then I think also that question of the cost recovery. So there are some of those things, and I would assume that you would be able to work with us and with the DOE to figure out those, which to me seem quite solvable. Is that?
Yes, certainly.
You heard some of the things. I want to talk about the 244 and 40 in a minute, but on terms of those kinds of matters, you've heard anything that you think can't be kind of worked out, or is there anything that raises red flags to you in those kinds of
No, I
comments?
think we could work to make sure it's clear enough for everyone. I think there's a little different. Some people think it's clear as it is. I think it could use some clarification to make everyone happy, and there'd be no problem working out that language, I think.
And so, we've heard, if I may, Mr. Chairman, so we've heard quite a bit about the 240 and the 40, and I think we can understand the logic in some ways about the percentage of the transmission capacity and the 10% and so on and so forth, and the anxieties about these numbers. We've also heard that it is enabling, so those anxieties will get addressed in the case before the PUC. But could you talk a little bit more about why, for you who want to build this project, those numbers mean something?
Yeah, I'll start with the 240, and the witness from Eversource was right that the starting point was SB 54 had that number, so that might be a good starting place. I did a quick calculation. I said, well, that's about 20% of the line. New Hampshire's load is about 10%, which is what I would expect, the starting point to be for New Hampshire. And we are trying to make sure, and we think it's right, as I think everyone here would agree, that if we are going to go forward with this project, we want it to be shared regionally because the benefits are realized regionally. Some states might argue more than others. New Hampshire might recognize they have some additional community benefits or tax benefits. But roughly, we think it's fair that all states should be contributing. So you start off with the assumption New Hampshire at least probably start off thinking about their load share. But the 240, 20%, maybe double the load share, is not to exceed. And it provides, which I think someone else used the same term, which I was going to use, it's the flexibility. You want to keep that flexibility. Here's an example. Let's say New Hampshire is, their analysis shows what we show, that the benefits are, maybe even benefits outweigh costs 3-to-1 perhaps. And Eversource and the other EDCs will have to do their own analysis and modeling. But let's say the benefits are 3-to-1 over the costs. And we're in a situation where, let's say one state doesn't, for whatever reason, doesn't contribute. They don't get their legislation passed or whatever. But most of the other states in New England are able to share that. But we can't go forward because one state has decided they're not contributing. Well, I think you want that flexibility for New Hampshire to say, given the benefits far outweigh the cost, we could still take 15%. I'm just throwing out numbers, right? We want to take 10%, and that's our goal. But if we need this project to either go forward or not, to realize these enormous benefits or not, maybe we need to consider going to 160 megawatts instead of 120, or whatever the number might be. I think it would be a mistake to prevent at least the ability to consider that and have the project potentially die because the legislation restricted to no more than 120. So I think that addresses, I hope, the question on the 240. That not to exceed the 240. Yeah. So then I think the other one was on the 40-year. Again, that was a not to exceed 40-year length. I think transmission, you should start, which is mentioned by one of the witnesses. It is a very long life asset. Those benefits will continue forever. So one question, I think, the reason for that flexibility is the EDCs might say, I know the line's going to be around for 40 years. I want to retain those rights to use the line, however I may decide over those 40 years. Therefore, I'm willing to support a 40-year contract. The other thing to consider is if it's a 40-year contract at the extreme, or something less, 20 I've heard suggested today, there's a big difference in how the cost of service for that line would be recovered. You'd have to recover it on an accelerated basis over 20 years if you limited the recovery to 20 years. The capital depreciation is quicker. The annual payment requirements will be much higher, a shorter period versus a longer period of a contract. And also, a utility may want to look at, well, I understand that, depending on how I recover it over short or longer term, changes the annual revenue requirements. There's also, you find, depending on the project, there's a sweet spot potentially, where if you look simply at the cost of paying for that line over the term you decide on, the present value to customers might be at the lowest value somewhere in between that 20 and 40 years. So I think it's important, again, for all those reasons, to keep that flexibility to find the best deal for the ratepayers.
Thank you. All right, Senator Pearl with a question.
Thank you. So I've been listening intently here for an hour and 40 minutes, and it seems one of the concerns is at least related to the 120, 240, about how that's going to impact New Hampshire ratepayers. Is it possible to negotiate into one of these long-term transmission service agreements, like an annual evaluation of that use provision, and then you could determine the actual use annually and perhaps adjust it according to what we are really using? Because that use could go both ways, whether we're importing or exporting. So, I mean, we may be 10% of the load, but in the event we had projects that came into the state that all of a sudden made us an energy exporter, we could be using more percentage of that exporting to other areas. Just a thought.
Yeah, and I think, if we start off ideally, and that's what we're aiming for, we're having the same discussions with every other state. We want them all to pay their load share, right? But we'll keep it flexible. So at the start, when we get enough subscribers to pay for 100% of the line, then we'll move forward with that major investment. Those owners and those parties, as they move along, could decide to use their rights or even trade them between each other in certain ways. I think, example, maybe you think of if New Hampshire decided 10 years in the contract that they had an opportunity and actually wanted to sell wanted to purchase a power purchase agreement at a certain price, they could talk to a utility in another state that maybe is simply using it for this, bi-directional flow and the wholesale market benefits without a power purchase agreement. So I think the flexibility would always remain between the parties to increase or decrease amongst themselves their ownership and rights to the capacity. And I think there's a question that reminds me, there's a question earlier about the confusion of the capacity rate. The way these contracts would work would be if New Hampshire signs up and finds it beneficial to support the cost of 10% of the line over the term that's agreed upon, they would have the rights to use or transfer to others, such as under a storage service agreement. They might say, in exchange for you, Hydro-Quebec, agreeing to take it at this price and send it back at this price, we'll transfer our rights to use the line that we gain by paying for the line. So that's why you have what we call the purchase of transmission capacity rights. That's in exchange for those signing up to support the cost of the transmission.
Okay, thank you.
Seeing no further questions, thank you very much, and we're going to close the hearing. Listen to the next prime sponsor. Oh, that's you. Are we having fun?
All right, with that, we will open the hearing on Senate Bill 391 and recognize the prime sponsor, Senator Avard. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, committee members. For the record, I'm Senator Kevin Avard, prime sponsor of SB 391. Interconnection for certain customer generations. This bill basically requires the PUC.
Senator, could we get the conversations in the back outside? It's hard for us to hear. Thank you. Please continue, Senator.
Thank you. As I was saying, this bill requires the Public Utilities Commission to begin rulemaking for the purpose of setting uniform procedures for distributed energy resources that are proposed for the interconnection to the electrical infrastructure. And as you may know, in 2022, I introduced SB 262 as an act relative to the customer generators of electric energy alongside my colleagues, Senator Waters, Senator Bradley, and Senator Gray. Given the concerns that I've had regarding the ability for the Granite Staters to interconnect to our state's transmission and distribution grid, while we must study the impact of interconnecting customers' generators to ensure safety and reliability, we must also ensure fairness to the customers in the process, giving them both transparency, predictability across the state utilities. Over the past few years, I've continued to receive concerns from my constituents about delays and the cost of these processes and the differing rules from the utility to the next, from one utility to the next. And for this reason, I introduced SB 391 this year to unlock the next logical step in this work following the Department of Energy study, which we received in December. SB 391 asked the Public Utilities Commission to adopt updated interconnection procedures in a timely manner. I expect you will hear today from customers regarding their own experiences and many that warrant timely action on behalf of to resolve such challenges. And I look forward to hearing from all parties' perspectives and learning how we can move forward together. And because of time constraints, Senator, we got two other bills to go through, so I'm going to ask to delay questions until the people come up to testify on this bill.
Good idea. Thank you, Senator.
Thank you.
Josh Elliott, wishing to speak and is opposed to the bill.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. For the record, Josh Elliott, Director of the Division of Policy and Programs for the New Hampshire Department of Energy. As you mentioned, the department is opposed to this bill, not because of the policy consideration, but because of how this process, as you had mentioned in Senate Bill 262, has unfolded. As part of that process, and as part of that process, the department looked at these interconnection, opened an investigation, heard from a number of stakeholders, including many I'm sure who will be testifying after me on this bill, to look at this question. We certainly get those calls as well regarding interconnection questions, delays, processes, just it not moving more efficiently. And it's a legitimate concern. I'm not here to deny that it is not a legitimate concern for customers. As part of that study and that evaluation, no fewer than 6 different interconnection processes were suggested by 6 stakeholders. Six different ones. I'm going to quote directly from the report. Quote, there are a number of technical, operating, processing, and procedural challenges of integrating large numbers of customer generators and energy storage systems into New Hampshire's electric distribution systems. To ensure greater clarity and appropriateness of any potential statutory changes, the department suggests waiting for the results of working groups before recommending statutory changes, end quote. As part of the process, again, you heard there were 6 different interconnection processes, models that were suggested by stakeholders. There's no agreement. There isn't. This bill, as part of that process, as you noted, the report that was issued in December proposed instituting these working groups to work further at these issues. This bill, however, takes the direct approach saying, just implement it, just do it. And there's no consensus as to what those models should be. And the bill itself does make reference to it, including IP 2022-01, which was that aforementioned study, says we should utilize, the Public Utility Commission shall utilize those comments, as well as a reference to the IREC's 2023 interconnection model, which was not reviewed by the as part of the investigation because it hadn't been issued yet. So this is sort of an unknown quantity to those as far as that investigation. Obviously, people have been able to read it and now analyze it. If there was unanimous recommendation out of that investigation by all the stakeholders, the utilities, the advocates, the solar developers, trade organizations, who said, yes, this is the one you should do, this is how we should do it, I would be up here with a different position. We've asked the department to conduct this investigation. We've gone through. We're trying to reach a consensus through an open and fair and honest stakeholder engagement process. Folks can come to the legislature to ask whatever they want. I'm here to provide the context of what this situation is that we're talking. Again, this is not to discount that there are issues, and really that's something that does need to get sorted out, but this bill doesn't get us here because it's asking the Public Utilities Commission to just go straight forward, pick one, when there is none of that agreement already. Usually when you're going through a rulemaking process, usually you've got general idea, you've got some idea of what needs to be done here. And there's not that consensus among all the stakeholders, which would make for a very, very difficult rulemaking process, if not impossible to actually undertake. Further, even if there were sort of unanimous recommendation out of that commission, I would be commenting on the rulemaking deadlines that will require rules to be adopted by December 31st of this year, with implementation with effective date of January 1st of 2025. Now you may say, oh, well, that's plenty of time. Sure. For those of you who have been in GELCAR, it is not.
I've been there.
So this bill takes effect 60 days after passage, with another 45 days for the Public Utilities Commission to actually open this rule-making procedure. Just in the timelines that GELCAR requires for public notice, hearings, things like that, it's not a feasible timeline. I will add that I have been requested to and offer this on behalf of the Public Utilities Commission, that if they do not have the bandwidth to be able to do this, so they would need additional staff in order or ability to hire consultants or some other way to get resources in order to actually undergo this rulemaking process. So with that, happy to take any questions.
How do we expedite it then? How do we get moving forward? How do we get the consensus? We're trying to light a fire under somebody, you know.
I would say you could do a Bradley special, have the utilities and the advocates and the solar developers all sit in a room together and come to an agreement.
So you all heard Josh. Okay, just asking, just throwing that out there. Into the
And I don't mean to make light of the issue. It is very complicated. You're talking about a lot of very complex issues in terms of balancing competing interests. However, even if there were an agreement, I would still say we'd have to work on the timelines for actually doing rulemaking.
Thank you for your testimony, and I'm sure Senator Water has a question.
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Howard, did you? You know, I think you hear the frustration in this. We hear from constituents all the time who are having interconnection problems, and it is really almost seems random, utility, and sometimes I make a call and you know, thank you. The utilities respond and try to get it done. And I also will note the frustration over the grid mod. You know, we passed the grid mod bill, which said take a quick study of the issue around the first interconnection costs and then subsequent people who use the interconnection, and because those costs be shared. And you know, when the report came out, and I you know, understand the process you went through, but we couldn't get there. And so, you know, you can see why. I mean, can we have some assurance that we can actually get this done, unless we go to the PUC and say, you must do it right now? I mean, what kind of assurances do we have that we won't be sitting here and it'll be the same situation in a year?
I would ask the folks behind me. Not to be flippant, I mean, this is not really a decision of the department. We went through this investigation. These are the results. We're committed to working by establishing these additional working groups to try to get consensus on this.
Yeah, I appreciate it, but I guess my question would be that if that process has not been effective to date, why not go to the PUC, which is an adjudicative body, and that it will be complicated, difficult, yes, but it will have to be done.
You could take that route. You would need much longer timeline just to do rules implementation, as well as to have that input. They could make the decision and say, hey, you know what? Fine, you're gonna take this route. You're going to do this kind. You're going to do this interconnection model. But I mean, it's the department. I mean, the department's report. If we had not thought it would, if we thought it was impossible to get to a consensus at some point, we would not have suggested talking about it further.
Fair enough. Thank you.
No further questions? Thank you very much, Josh. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Mike Licata. Welcome back.
Thank you. Again, Michael Licata representing Eversource, opposed to SB 391 as introduced. I think Mr. Elliott, on behalf of the DOE, raised a lot of the similar concerns that we have with the bill. I would really like to focus on the timeline that the bill lays out. So, you know, if you imagine the bill getting passed and signed to law at some point late June, seems like a realistic timeline. 60 days after passage, you're into mid to late August. Another 45 days, now we're into October, and then you essentially have the commission starting a rulemaking on, as Mr. Elliott said, you know, a very complicated topic with a lot of different interests, and having to complete that rulemaking by December 31st with JALCAR review and the statutory requirements of JALCAR. And so, again, we don't believe that is a feasible timeline. And, you know, we're not adverse to rulemaking. We believe that ultimately rulemaking will be required in order to get where everybody wants to go. This timeline, this approach is something that we don't support. We do agree with the recommendations of the DOE report, which I would describe as taking a reasonable and thoughtful approach, setting up working groups with the various stakeholders. One of the working groups focused on technical and engineering issues, the other administration and process. The goal of those working groups, as I understand it, is to report out recommendations for rulemaking so that hopefully we can have some agreement prior to rulemaking. We can get the parties in alignment before rulemaking starts. Another way of going at that is you just sort of have it all play out in rulemaking, which could lead to a much longer, more contested proceeding. So with that, happy to answer questions that the committee may have.
Mike, what do you think would be a reasonable timeline?
I'd have to check back with my folks who would be engaged in the rulemaking, certainly more than a month or two.
Senator Waters?
So are the working groups meeting?
I didn't see anything.
I would have to check. I apologize.
What was the question?
I
Are
think
the
the
working groups meeting? And I see some heads saying no, they're not.
yeah the report from the DOE I know was issued on December 5th. So
Right.
I think it's relatively new.
And so, if I may, Mr. Chairman, so let's say they start meeting at some point. How long do you think it'll take for the working groups?
Depends on if the parties can come to an agreement and find consensus. I would just be pulling a number out of the air.
Big deal?
Further questions?
Nope.
Seeing none, thank you very much, Mike. Appreciate it. All right. John Greer. Yeah,
Sorry, first time.
that's all right. We're fun to work with.
I'm glad to hear it. I'm John Greer. I'm president of Wirebelt. We're a fifth-generation family-owned and operated business. We are a global business with locations in England and Germany, headquartered here in New Hampshire. We manufacture and supply conveyor belts for many industries: food, agriculture, electronics, automotive, and more. Our company's belts have transported spent uranium rods, parts for space shuttles, help sort blueberries, dino nuggets, and a whole lot of chocolate-coated candies. We're a little bit over 100 years in, and Wirebelt has done well. We've won many awards, including being a great place to work, Hall of Fame business a couple times over by Business New Hampshire magazine. We're proud of that. And we've done a lot to support our employees, community in many ways, including most recently buying a bunch of gifts for 130 kids through Operation Santa. I hope we're a better company in 100 years, but New Hampshire is not a low-cost place to manufacture. Labor, healthcare, taxes, and more contribute to a constantly changing landscape that we need to navigate to stay globally and nationally competitive. When we relocated to Bedford, New Hampshire in 2023 from Londonderry, we were planning for the future and wrapped our 120 square foot building in insulating skin to better manage temperatures. It gets cold in New Hampshire. We took steps with our air supply, lighting, equipment, and more. One of our largest investments was solar. 2,455 panels make up an 840 kilowatt AC system designed to offset 90% of our projected demand. We took out a loan to help fund these projects. Unfortunately, we have yet to see the full benefit of our investment, despite the panels being on our building for over a year. The year we moved to our new location, in 2023, we saw our electric bills peak at $59,173.85 in 1 month. That's $52,000 more than what we had paid the previous year in 2022 at our old location. Knowing that we'd invested in solar and were paying interest on those loans made this particularly frustrating. For context, if we were operational in April as expected, or if we are operational in April as expected, it will have been roughly 2.5 years since our application to connect and roughly 1.5 years since we had a signed agreement. I want to invest in our people. I want to invest in our business and our community. I do not want to be spending on electricity when I have a solar array on our roof. Please ensure timely adoption of comprehensive interconnection rules in New Hampshire.
So you're one of the 6?
One of the 6?
Well, for interconnection.
Yes, for interconnection.
Yeah. It's a lot of money. Questions?
Just a quick one. So, do you fear that the message over these interconnection issues might be to businesses, don't locate here?
I want to make investments with predictable returns. You know, I mean, we made this investment, you run the math on it. You know, we're spending on interest, we're spending on electricity, like, yeah, a structure helps make a predictable outcome. And I can, at least if I have a more predictable structure, I can make a more educated decision about where we go. This was a much longer timeline than anticipated.
When you made that investment, what was your expectation?
I was hoping to have it up when we moved into our new location. We've been in there for over a year, or it'll be a year in February.
This is nuts. Okay, sorry.
Yeah, I mean, I'd just say, you know, there's few businesses that have been better partners and, you know, contributed more to New Hampshire than Wirebelt, and this is really discouraging.
I appreciate that.
Thank you.
Further questions? No questions? Thank you for your testimony.
Thank you.
Russ?
There we go. Thank you very much for hearing us out today, Chair Avard, Chair Perrell, members of the Senate Committee, Natural Resources. It's great to be able to bring our perspective forward. We're a little bit further in the process, and actually, we move through the goods that John's helping people manufacture. So those suites that people are getting, that's what our role is. I served as Senior Vice President of Sales for Associated Grocers of New England over in Pembroke. I'm here today to represent AG, but also as a New Hampshire citizen. AG New England, if you're unfamiliar, is New England's largest wholesale grocery distribution center that's retailer owned. The customers that we serve are small town markets. Our business model is a cooperative model, so at the end of the year, after we've processed and invested against our business, our profits are returned to the small hometown retailers that many people love to buy from. As we go through the process, all of our effort is to drive down cost of goods for our retailers. We don't sell to chains. We sell to single store operators primarily. We have about 600 customers all over New England, and pretty much every independent retailer in, every independent food retailer in New Hampshire is buying their groceries from us. And our job is to keep their costs down. As you can surely imagine, a facility of our size, we're about 500,000 square feet. We moved in 2006 out of Manchester to Pembroke, and we've grown our facility, and we're considering doing it again. We use large amounts of resources. Energy is one of our biggest expenses because we have to keep everything cold. We are anticipating today about expanding our facility and expanding the refrigeration requirements as our business grows. And Senator Waters, you asked a question about whether or not this would be something that would keep somebody from doing business here, and that's a very real consideration for us. We like our distribution center here, but we find it very, very difficult to continue in that vein and have considerations for picking a second facility because our utility expense is very, very high, and I have to be careful how I invest our independent retailers' money. we have to get a return on that. And we're talking about the interconnection fee here, the interconnection rules today. There are some other broader issues that I think we'll talk about hopefully at another time. On 2021, we aligned our fiscal goals and our organizational goals around sustainability and built what was at the time the largest rooftop solar array in New Hampshire. Our 1 megawatt AC solar array is made up of 3,400 solar panels that sit atop of our facility, generating 1.45 million kilowatt hours annually. Today, it offsets about 20 to 25% of our overall usage. We're incredibly proud of this investment, and we want to expand. However, the journey to get to where we are was not without its challenges. Because of past obstacles and a lack of process rectification, the pursuit of an additional array has been severely quelled. For example, our first grid impact study forecasted unprecedented costs for interconnection, largely due to the estimates of specific equipment being knowingly procured by other companies at a significantly lower price. To be clear here, though, pricing was not the problem. It was a lack of set regulations to govern the process that removed any opportunity to challenge or for dispute resolution. For me, I need to go to the board that's made up of independent retailers and have them invest in us. And when we have the delays that we have in installation, I went outside a fiscal year. I had a 6-month delay for when we could charge the system and actually start to pull power off of it when it was completely ready to go. Additionally, unnecessary equipment for interconnection was substantively delayed. AG was ultimately overbilled by $40,000 with a less than urgent response. Those 6 months cost 425,000 kilowatt hours to be pulled off of the grid. One of the things that happens for us quite frequently because of the energy requirements to provide refrigeration in the size facility that we run is we get requests from the grid to go off the grid during power emergency situations. High consumption times inside the summer, possibly storms are going to knock out lines because of what we do to the lines and the poles. So we'll be asked to go off grid, which we can do. We fire up diesel generators to be able to do it. It's crazy that we would do something like that from a power generation standpoint. But we need to, and we need to help everywhere we can. And so as we're trying to pursue added solar benefit inside the community, and as we go through our plan, there's all kinds of challenges. For us to not be able to forecast the number of days and months that it's going to require for us to just simply charge the system is a very, very difficult proposition for me as I go to present to my board of directors where the return to zero and the return on investment is on this project with many other projects. And we do question if this is the right place to do it. Simply put, the current system in place or that lack thereof makes positive initiatives such as clean solar energy an uphill battle. As you can see, AG has been directly impacted by insufficient clarity, misinformation, and unpredictability involved in such a process. It's not just our own benefit that we're primarily plead as citizens as well. With that, we respectfully ask this legislature to enable the Public Utilities Commission to integrate the demonstration of equity for the betterment of New Hampshire's communities far and wide. We appreciate your consideration and perspective. We invite you to reach out to us with questions or to tour our facility and see it for yourselves.
Thank you for your testimony. Questions?
Yeah, thank you. First, let me just say there's few companies, again, that have meant more for New England's economy than Associated Grocers. And the future, I mean, you know, we all looking with interest your new initiatives in AI and robotics. I mean, really cutting edge and just, you know, the kind of industries that we want to thrive
Thank you, sir.
in the state. And again, I just say, as to what's discouraging, we're the policymakers, and I think we feel like we have failed our businesses in some fundamental ways on this area. Could you, I mean, given what you went through, and I understand the equipment, how you're describing equipment issues there, but could you imagine the usefulness of us trying to create a set of rules that was particularly for industrial? I mean, for businesses of a certain size, that might be a kind of a fast track capacity?
Absolutely. Yeah, no, absolutely. I think it's well warranted from my point of view. You know, we've spent some time with some of your colleagues and some friends over at the DOE and taken a look at some of the impacts of the things that we're trying to do. And I think gaining that perspective, you know, at the risk of saying too much, I think sometimes in the legislative process, the rules and regulations are put in place to stop what I would call like a bad actor, somebody, you know, who maybe doesn't have the best interest at heart. And those same rules have the unintended consequence of getting in the way of people that are, I'm obviously trying to cost out my business. I want to make sure my retailers are getting the best possible cost of goods. We also understand our responsibility as a significant consumer to offset those things. So I think fast tracking and understanding what larger businesses are doing is a great perspective from my view, Senator.
Thank you.
So if I understand correctly, there were 6 different approaches to solving this, or if I understood what the DOE was saying, is there's, you know, we have to pick one?
Yes.
That's in the back of my mind, but your cost is being pushed onto the consumers, correct?
Ultimately, yeah, it goes out to, you know, the retail owners, right? And then that ultimately lands on the cost of goods.
So we need to do something quick.
I would agree.
Yeah. And do you have, of those 6 particular options that was mentioned, if I understood correctly, do you have one in mind that we would want to push forward, or that the PUC should?
Yeah, so I'm a little bit more agnostic to the 6 different types of methods, other than that I need a predictable quantity of time. And I need to understand what the rules of engagement are and when we'll be able to complete the process. It's that lack of information that prevents me from being able to take care of all of my other fiduciary responsibilities.
Right.
And so I wouldn't be an expert on it in terms of those 6. We're already up and running. Part of this is that we're considering expanding. And so, you know, we're considering expanding our facility, we're considering expanding our refrigeration in New Hampshire, and we're considering expanding our solar array as much as we can. And that would require another interconnection. And if we do that, part of the degree of difficulty for us when we go through our budgeting process is to say, and then we have this big variability of time. John gave testimony that it's been a year for him. It was a 6-month experience for us, but to be honest, after 4 months, we started trying to extend our influence, as Senator Waters expressed, to expedite the process. It's lunacy that I'm going to spend $70,000 a month and have panels on my rooftop that are charged that I can't do anything with.
Right.
And that I can't predict and say that it's going to be a 6 or an 8 or a 12-week process is just craziness. We don't operate this way.
So we need to light a fire under somebody's kazoo. Yeah.
I agree completely, Senator.
Yeah. Are there further questions? Seeing none, thank you very much for your
Thank you very
testimony.
much.
Okay. Jeff Foote, Bedford?
Jeff doesn't leave, but I do have his testimony that
Well, he was in support, and if you want to submit his testimony, thank you very much. Appreciate it. You want to talk for him? Okay. She declined. All right. Sam, and if you can be brief, we're running out of time. And the only reason I'm saying I got 2 more bills, and they're going to kick me out soon.
Absolutely. I'll be so quick. So once again, Sam Evans Brown from Clean Energy New Hampshire. We are also in support of this bill. I just want to speak briefly about the interconnection study. I'm going to put that in quotes. I think the idea that study process was rigorous and fulsome and a really great process is something that is not accurate, in my opinion. The process essentially consisted of the Department of Energy asking for written comments. They provided a single 1-hour tech session for us to discuss differences in those comments, and then the report essentially summarized what was in the comments. So we disagree with the assertion that we have a good process underway and that we're working towards consensus on this issue. I would also note that while the report recommended the creation of stakeholder groups, there appears to have been no action by the Department of Energy to create those working groups and get them up and running. We passed Senate Bill 262 2 years ago because of this issue. We've seen no progress in the intervening time on resolving it, and we feel that this bill is appropriate and ready for prime time.
Thank you for your brevity and getting right to the point. Questions from the committee? Seeing none, thank you. Vaughan? Vaughn. That works. Vaughn. And you'll be our last speaker. And you have the floor.
Great, thank you for having me, Senator. I appreciate being in front of this body. It's my first time testifying in New Hampshire. I'm from Maine and have spent the better part of a decade on these issues in Maine. I work on interconnection strategy for Revision Energy. You'll see all the details here. In the interest of time, I just want to kind of get into the guts of this bill. So as I mentioned, I've been working on these issues for roughly 10 years. I was the head of the solar industry trade group in Maine for 7 years, as well as the CEO of a small company based in rural Maine that dealt with these issues both with the utilities directly, like the customers that you've heard from, and being an advocate on their behalf, as well as at the legislature and at the Public Utilities Commission in Maine. It is nuanced work. Interconnection issues are happening across the country. Each state does them a little bit differently. What I want to hit on a couple of comments that were made here, which is the issues that customers are feeling in New Hampshire today are based on decisions that were made 20 years ago. So the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission encouraged the states to adopt these types of procedures in 2005, 2006. More than 30 states adopted the model interconnection procedures that are consistent with the Interstate Renewable Energy Council that is discussed in this bill. And New Hampshire was not one of them. New Hampshire worked to cut it out of whole cloth and made a very conservative set of limited interconnection rules, which at the time didn't have huge consequence. There wasn't a ton of this stuff that was going in, but times have changed. And as a result, as we know, legislative and regulatory practices don't move at the speed of industry or move at the speed of market. And now is the time that things need to take place, because as we're seeing from large customers to small residential customers who are at times waiting months and months with a system that's on their roof to get turned on and go through processes. Because what happens in states that have not adopted comprehensive interconnection procedures is that the utilities are left to be their own regulator on these conditions. And I have empathy for all the stakeholders. I work closely with utilities, with regulators, with legislators. This is very complicated. And it's important to have a baseline. There was a discussion that there are 6 models that were put forward in the investigation. It's important to understand that they do have a commonality. All 6 of them were based on the Interstate Renewable Energy Council's model interconnection procedures at the time that they were adopted. What happens is that these are state-level procedures that as things shift from state to state, they get modified to meet the particular needs of that state. This has happened in Maine, this has happened in Massachusetts, it's happened in Vermont, it's happened all around the region. And so we do have consensus in that we need procedures, and there's generally a consensus on what that baseline should be. And as we're hearing from customers, the important thing is not to get it perfect right now. The important thing to do is adopt a baseline that New Hampshire can then modify to meet its particular needs, as more than 30 states around the country have done. And so this bill, SB 391, does just that. And I think the timelines are reasonable, because what we see is, if we all know this, we're a deadline-driven society. If my phone does not tell me I need to have my testimony done before this hearing this morning, it's probably not going to get done, right? And with the parties that we have at the table as stakeholders, giving a firm deadline says, we need to make this simple, and we need these rules to reflect best practices that have served other jurisdictions. Then those interconnection working groups can say, okay, now that we have this and have stabilized this for the customer, which is the most important stakeholder that we're talking about, we can then take a look at what needs to be adjusted for New Hampshire. But 20 years ago, New Hampshire didn't create that baseline, hence we're dealing with the consequences now. And so what this bill does is it encourages New Hampshire to take a step that could have been done 20 years ago, do it now, and get the process started so that over time it can be iterated to help serve 20% of customers that are having challenges with the new rules versus the 100% of customers that are having the challenges now.
Thank you very much for your testimony.
Yeah, so you mentioned IREC and the model interconnection procedures, and I didn't know whether those procedures were the topic of any discussion in the 262 process.
They were not the baseline by which that investigation was operated upon. They were, questions were asked about which models and whether the Interstate Renewable Energy Council model would serve best. And that's what ended up soliciting, multiple different, opinions on what should happen. Also note that while that proceeding was taking place, the Interstate Renewable Energy Council published its Freeing the Grid report that does a comprehensive assessment of states around the country to see how their procedures are serving the exact aims of SB 262. New Hampshire got a D, and it was as a result of a comprehensive analysis that we were able to review. It wasn't in the investigation itself, but it happened during that time. So we were able to get direct feedback on what are the improvements that are needed to align with best practices around the country, and those are the interconnection procedures we discussed.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator.
Further questions? Thank you very much for your testimony.
Thank you.
And that ends the hearing on.
Can I ask one question to Josh before we stop?
Josh.
I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman. Just to get a quick word from you on the IREC model rules. I know a bunch of other states it says have adopted them. Do they provide a model that we could use as a basis for moving forward quickly?
So the recommendation, I'm sorry, in the bill itself, it does reference the 2023.
Yeah. So I guess the question is why? What do you see as the problem with those?
I am not an expert on interconnection. I know there are other people here who are experts in interconnection. Again, there's a disagreement between all of the stakeholders as to which one you should pick. Right. The department is happy to implement whatever you want us to implement, but if there's not going to be consensus, rulemaking process is going to be litigated, and that's not going to serve anyone's interests.
Thank you. Sorry to drag you back up. I just
it's quite all right.
Circle on that. Okay.
Thanks, Josh. Appreciate it. And we're going to close the hearing on this, and we're going to hear from the prime sponsor of SB 451.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I have a drafted amendment that's going to go around.
On this one? No. I'm going to be out of here by 12:30. But I'm going to try to. Yeah, I want to get done by 12, but I'm looking forward to 12. That's my parachute. Senator, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Senator David Waters, District 4, to introduce Senate Bill 451. And I'm sorry that OLS didn't produce an amendment that we submitted a few days back, but I thought that I would speak to the draft here because there is one substantial difference between this and the version that you already had. So just to set the context for this briefly, because we're going to hear more from other more interested parties on this one. We have made enormous progress on site evaluation. We've envisioned really a three-parts process. We did House Bill 281 last year, which moved us forward on the enforcement side of SCC. We're going to receive House Bill 609, which is a really substantial bipartisan compromise, good, strong support in the House that is going to reform the SCC process in ways that we talked about a lot last year. There was a lot of consideration in that process in the House of doing the third step as part of House Bill 609. The third step is to say, can't we have an expedited process for existing facilities who want to transform from one energy supply to another? And that's an important thing to be able to do for facilities in this state. And the logic of it, I think, is quite clear to us because these are facilities that have already gone through a site evaluation and have been operating. So within a restricted set of criteria of the changes that they make, it should be possible to have those projects move along. Now, it was decided in the House while there was support for that. You'll see co-sponsorship on this bill, but it just felt procedurally that it was better to bring it as a separate bill. So that's why we have Senate Bill 451. And as you can see from the amendment I passed around, it does basically sets the criteria that, and this is what's different from the original version of the bill. It's saying the same nameplate capacity. So we're not asking for an increase in nameplate capacity. It's saying you're going to be producing the same amount of power. You might be transforming an existing plant. You might be doing an expansion at that site or an adjacent land to it, but the same nameplate capacity. And then it lays out, as you'll see, all the kinds of procedures for how the application comes in, how it's considered, timelines for that, and so forth. I think it lays out a very good and clear process that has been worked on considerably by all the parties involved. I want to say something about the timeliness of this. It has been really important that we have done the work on site evaluation that we've done in the last few years, not only for our ability to provide the power supply that we need and to let investors know that, in fact, you can get some things done in this state, but I think it is also crucial for the transformation of power supply that is coming fast at us. Offshore wind, next June, July, the auctions are going to occur. There's an expedited process there. We're going to see that moving very, very quickly. That's going to be transformed about our power supply. We have passed important legislation on hydrogen, which may play a major role in our future energy supply. And we've had the passage of the IRA, which is flowing hundreds of billions of dollars into investments in power capacity. And there's an opportunity for New Hampshire businesses and generation to take advantage of extraordinary provisions of that legislation. So that's why this is very timely. That it's a step 3, and in light of what's going on in the larger investment world, and we're going to hear about what this can mean for facilities in this state to transform what they do, how they produce their power. So I'm not going to go into more of the details, Mr. Chairman, because I know we're going to hear more about it. But I did really want to emphasize, how this bill fits into the good work the legislature's done and the extraordinary opportunities that are before us right now to get some real substantial investment into the state. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator. Appreciate it. Pardon me? Oh, thank you. Phil, you're doing a great job, man. Really. I'm having a difficult time with this thing. Thank you. Because of time, I'm going to ask for people to come up and talk a little bit more about it. And because of time, I'm going to have to limit time to about 3 minutes at the max, just because we have another bill, and they're going to kick me out. That means us. So with that, I'm going to ask the department to come up. Josh, would you mind coming up and talking a little bit about this? Did you get a copy of this?
I know probably our staff has seen it. I don't know if I've seen a copy of it. I will be very brief. Josh Elliott, Department of Energy, Policy and Programs Division Director. Department's neutral on the bill. Generally speaking, we're supportive of measures that make it easier for additional electrons to get onto the grid, reducing costs. Details are tricky. So I know there's amendments floating around, probably subject to further discussion here. I've got a copy in front of me. I have not been able to read it, but just wanted to reiterate that the department is happy to continue to provide feedback as the process moves forward.
Thank you very much. Questions from the committee? Seeing none. Thank you, Joe.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. James Andrews. Welcome.
Morning. Chairman Avar, committee members, thank you. My name, for the record, is James Andrews, President, CEO of Granite Shore Power, testifying in support of SB 451. I think, as many of you know, all of Granite Shore Power's generating stations, all located here in New Hampshire, are essential resources within ISO New England, assuring reliability and serving as a safe bridge transitioning to the next generation of energy resources in New Hampshire. From our earliest days, GSP's message has been consistent and clear. We strongly support such a transition and will play an important role in providing power to businesses and families in our region during that process and beyond. We've heard a lot about transmission and interconnection this morning. So I think it's imperative that if New Hampshire is going to benefit from this energy transition and renewable energy opportunities, it's imperative that the state support siting reforms that may accelerate the siting success and completion of infrastructure and renewable projects we all seek to advance. As an asset owner and developer, I often ask myself, how do we get over this imaginary bridge and execute the transition that is so anticipated? Frankly, it starts with a more efficient siting process. There is an abundance of projects developers are seeking to move forward with that are aligned with grid transition and the electrification of the economy. The ISO New England interconnection queue is replete with interconnection requests for wind, solar, battery projects. From a policy standpoint, as we've heard, the Inflation Reduction Act, or IRA, has created attractive tax and borrowing incentives. Clearly, these projects are penciling out initially, and there is an urgency to get them done. However, why are there so few being completed? In my opinion, the siting process lacks efficiency, creating time delays and adding risk to projects that may otherwise be avoided, particularly for sites with existing infrastructure that are close to load, close to transmission, and distribution. By most measures, the siting process, as we've heard ad nauseum, is measured more in years than months. Projects often cannot sustain the gauntlet of a 15-month interconnection request, added to a 15-month permitting and SEC process, added to unknown timing for local planning, zoning, and public safety considerations. If a project makes it through that gauntlet, one of the following, well, if not all three, cost, technology, and financing, may have significantly changed during that process, and you go back to the start. Does this project still work financially? Can changes in technology require a new interconnection study? All of this may cause an endless loop, and a project may be caught in. So this may be appropriate for a greenfield site, but we ask, does it make sense for sites with existing infrastructure? I've said before, New Hampshire is well suited to take advantage of energy transition opportunities. New Hampshire has highly qualified trade professionals, favorable tax climate, and competitive businesses that will support projects. And most importantly, its existing major infrastructure necessary to transition the region to the next generation of energy resources and finally get across that bridge. So in conclusion, we commend the sponsor and co-sponsors for putting SB 451 forward, and we strongly support it. This bill will help New Hampshire lead the way, enabling energy and infrastructure projects that are truly transformative. It is critical that this legislation be advanced so we are not disadvantaged by a process that may unintentionally kill projects sorely needed. That will conclude my testimony. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you for your testimony. Questions from the committee?
Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Jim, for being here. And, you know, just a kind of a little more of a context as well, because I think your message is loud and clear about the SEC and existing facilities. But is your sense of, you know, not just for the future of Granite Shore, but for other power companies, that the kind of synergy here is the existing power capacity, you know, in plants, but then also a kind of energy park that you might have large-scale storage on the same site. You might have solar on the same site. You might have, you know, hydrogen storage and production on the same site. This is what, you know, the potential are for a new kind of models for companies to make things work.
Agree, and that sort of those types of more fulsome energy projects are those that really we're talking about, where you know, facilities that are in proximity to major infrastructure and have sort of large acreage to do multiple projects that are complementary to the overall objectives, I think is what's necessary. But oftentimes that gets very complicated when having to go through the existing siting process. And you know, I'll just add, Senator, you know, you and I have talked previously, you know, where these projects have the best chance of actually being completed is where there is already existing infrastructure that's not going to add cost that would make a project not financial, right? So I'll leave it at that.
Thank you very much for your testimony. Rep. Thomas? And because they're going to kick me out in the spirit of this bill and streamlining things, we're going to ask you to streamline your testimony if you could. If you have written testimony, just submit it and talk from your heart.
Thank you, Senator, and I'll be very brief. Representative Tom Corman, I represent Ward 3 of the City of Lebanon. I'm a co-sponsor on this bill. I serve in the House Science, Technology, and Energy Committee, so I expect this bill to arrive at our committee at some point. I served on the HB 609 subcommittee that fashioned the bill that passed the House. I, of course, support this bill. I was going to make 2 points where I was going to suggest changes, because I will suggest those changes when the bill gets to my committee. One of them, Senator Waters already referenced, which is the nameplate capacity issue. I was going to recommend a cap, not necessarily a percent cap, but perhaps an amount cap. But it sounds like the amendment just says same nameplate capacity. The other issue is lines 15 and 16 of the original bill that says any repowering or expansion project must fit within the facility's existing footprint or be constructed on an adjacent parcel. And I could imagine, just to take a ridiculously extreme example, you have a facility that fits in 1 acre and there's an adjacent parcel of 1,000 acres. So it seems like you might want to actually have a cap on the size of the adjacent parcel, perhaps same size as the original parcel. I know that others want to speak on the public, how the public is represented. I'll let them do that in the interest of brevity, and I'm happy to take questions.
You're going to be nice to us when we come there, right?
I make no promises.
Just kidding. Thank you, Representative. Questions from the committee? Seeing none. Appreciate your testimony.
You've got a copy of the new version?
I don't.
We'll talk. Yeah, I'll be in touch. Thank you.
Meredith, would you mind? And we're going to try to streamline it. I still got another bill, and like I said, they're going to try to kick us out, so trying to be fair with everybody, but
Understood.
help us out.
Good morning, Meredith Hatfield for the Nature Conservancy. We support all of the efforts the legislature is making to try to ensure that our energy siting processes are efficient and that they help us site the resources that we need to power the future of the state. One concern that we have with this legislation is that it does not require only clean or not emitting resources would qualify for this fast track process, and that is concerning to us. We are seeing flooding all around our state as a result of the impacts of climate change, and we know what we need to do, and hopefully new facilities in New Hampshire will be clean, but we think that if we are going to provide incentives or fast tracks, that they should only be available to non-emitting or clean energy resources. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. Questions from the committee? Seeing none. Thank you very much. M? Meredith gave us a great example of how we can just streamline these testimonies, so we appreciate it if you could.
My name is M. Friedrichs, and I work with 350 New Hampshire Action. There are a number of good reasons to support this bill in terms of recognizing that we need to speed up the process for our grid connections, but there are some current concerns that we believe that need amending and addressing in this. One is the scope of the bill, which Representative Corman has already brought up a little bit. I think there's a little clarification needed as to whether the amendment changes, and I haven't had a chance to look at it deeply, but in item 2, it says, A, the repowering of an existing facility can be no larger than existing nameplate capacity, and B, a project which is expanded or added to an existing facility may not increase the existing facility's nameplate capacity by more than 50%. I think we still have some concerns about that 50%, because if you have a very large project, a 50% increase can still have a very substantial impact on that community. Whereas if it's a smaller size project, then 50% may be very reasonable. So we could be talking about 1,500 megawatts, or we might be talking about 200 megawatts, and the impact to the community would be very different. So that really comes back to the heart of our concern with this, which is also to understand how RSA 162-H, Section 10, would be affected by this bill. We want a little more clarity in terms of the public hearing process because Governor Sununu and the Executive Council supported New Hampshire's involvement in a climate action plan, and part of that process, which we're now going through, is recognizing the unfair burden of pollution that has, because of power plants that some communities in New Hampshire have faced, like Berlin, Concord, and the Bow area. And so we do need to really address and make sure that the scope here is appropriate. And I'm not sure that that 50% really does that, or the footprint, the acreage as written. And then another point is that there's some concern that this only be applied to, in terms of the new technology that would be replacing in a repowering of a plant, that it only consider technologies that have been proven in New Hampshire, that are currently operating technologies in New Hampshire with no recorded safety or environmental permitting deviations. And the reason for that being that we would not see it as being appropriate to fast track an unproven technology or technology that has had issues through this process, and there'd be some concern that could be done. So by limiting it to technologies that are currently operating in New Hampshire and have had no record of safety or environmental permitting deviations, we would avoid that. And then just lastly, and very frankly, I think we've been a little surprised by the amount of, or to learn of kind of widespread opposition to this bill from various nonprofits, and not just, and community organizations, and not just environmental ones. And so I think, quite frankly, that if this bill were amended to clarify that it was speaking directly to clean energy, that a lot of that concern that we've heard of would be abated. And I think it's unusual for 350NH to be more open-minded on a bill like this than some of the other nonprofits that we've been talking to around this issue. So I do hope the supporters of the bill will take that to heart and consider that there may be greater chances of its success if it's clarified that it's clean energy.
Thank you very much, and why don't you, if you have some spare time, send some recommendations to the committee as far as how to make the changes. We'd love to consider that.
I'd be happy to do that.
I would just say, after you see the new version, let's be in touch, okay?
Okay.
And we are definitely running out of time, so I'm going to probably get a little bit quicker on the draw, only because leadership needs to give me another room. Just saying. I hate to get kicked out of here. Drew Beamer, please.
Greetings. I'm Drew Beamer, the administrator of the Site Evaluation Committee. I like it. Any questions?
Well done.
Roger that.
Glad we had this talk. Really, I'm glad. Thank you. Catherine. McCourt, yeah. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you. Kathy Corkery, New Hampshire Sierra Club. Very excited about the opportunities that have been discussed already, and just have some concerns. One has already been noted about the fast tracking of clean energy projects. Really support that, and it's exciting to hear from one of the developers here, Granite Shore Power, that they have that in mind, and I think it's just an easy add-on into the bill. The other concern that we had were for public notice, and I haven't had time with the amendment, but I know on the original bill it talked about public hearings process that were ill-defined on page 1, line 26. I would hope that the amendment includes a clearer public process with notice and local meetings. We know where these facilities are. And to have a public process to include the community should be an easy add. So thank you.
Thank you for your testimony.
After you've seen the amendment, give me a call.
I will.
Okay, I think we're good.
Okay, Nick? And you're with the all I got is Law Foundation? Conservation Law. Thank you.
Good morning, Nick Good morning, Nick Krakoff with the Conservation Law Foundation. I'll be pretty brief. I agree with a lot of the comments from my colleagues, particularly Ms. Hatfield, Ms. Corkery. But I agree with a lot of the aims of this bill. I think we want to support more renewable energy generation in the state. I think this bill will help that and expedite the siting of some of those facilities. I think that the bill really has a gap in that it would apply to all types of energy. And so, one issue with that is that if you're repowering a fossil fuel plant with another type of fossil fuel, such as going from coal to methane gas, that's going to result in significant environmental impacts. The air emissions impacts, water impacts, potentially environmental justice impacts. And so, I think we don't want to undermine or undercut the process for permitting those facilities when you have the potential for significant environmental impacts like you could with the repowering from one existing type of fossil fuel to another. So I mean, that's I think the main shortfall that I see with the bill. I think limiting it to clean energy or renewable energy would solve that issue. And just one brief comment I had. I mean, there was some discussion that some of these existing facilities have already gone through the process before, so there's less of a need for a long, drawn-out process. I just say some of these existing fossil fuel facilities, they were constructed in the 60s, so there was the process may not have been the same then, and then that's before there was a lot of environmental regulations, so there was less rigor looking at environmental impacts. So I would just say we can't necessarily assume that because it's gone through a process at one point in time that it doesn't need rigor going through it when they're going to change the facility. That's my testimony, and happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Seeing none, thank you very much.
Thanks.
And our last speaker is Jim Monahan. And you know the rules. Pass that on. Welcome, Jim.
I'm Jim Monahan with the DuPont Group. I'm here today on behalf of Granite Shore Power. I have been, as Senator Waters observed, working in this, what is now a three-step process to make reforms to the Site Evaluation Committee. I want to touch on a couple of principles, and I've worked with Senator Waters in drafting the draft amendment. I'm going to very happy and worked with a number of people in the room already. We'll work with those that come forward. The underlying principle here is that the Site Evaluation Committee statute is primarily a land use process for the state government. And if we're looking at existing sites, folks know what goes on there, and so for the most part, they have gone through the certificate process or other permitting processes. And so that's the principle, that because of that, we should be able to move things along quicker. The other principle is that for the most part, the amendment does not make massive changes to the Site Evaluation Committee process. What it does is try to create a swifter process for moving through both the regulatory permitting process and the public hearings process. So it tries to make those quicker, understanding that people know what goes on there. As a point of caution, and I've talked to a number of the people that testified already today, I think what the sticky point is going to be whether or not the state law should pick and choose which technologies should be subject to this. Current Site Evaluation Committee statutes doesn't do that. It leaves those issues around emissions and water permits and all that other stuff to the regulatory agencies. We're not proposing to change any of that. So I think it would be challenging to take the land use principles and begin to apply specific technologies to it. Certainly the questions around people's views as to what would be appropriate for any siting can be taken up in that permitting process, but I think it would be burdensome to this bill to try to cram that into a land use statute. So we'll continue to work with Senator Waters on this. You know, the draft that's out there, I think, is open to feedback. I'm happy to receive it. Senator Waters is happy to receive it. The committee was. I think we're well on our way to getting a consensus on creating a better system for existing facilities.
Thank you very much for your testimony.
Just a quick clarification question, if I may, Mr. Chair. So, thank you, Jim. And just, again, I'm sorry for all that we didn't have the amendment pop out of OLS. So, but I thought it was important because there was pretty significant change here. And so, existing nameplate capacity, which I mentioned. Then the other section here under H10, which talks about expansion, that's more about the. It's still the same nameplate capacity, right? Bottom line is that governs the expansion that might be requested on the site.
That's consistent with what
It's
Mr.
the
Andrews.
same nameplate overall, no matter if there's some expansion on the site.
Yeah, I think what Mr. Andrews talked about is important, which is where the early capital is going to flow under the IRA is going to be probably where the interconnections already exist. So if I've got a 470 megawatt interconnection at a facility, I'm likely to build something under the IRA that connects with that. The last hearing told you how long it takes to get a simple interconnection from Eversource. Think how long it's going to take to get one from the ISO. So.
And the IRA is all about renewable energy, isn't it?
All the tax benefits are absolutely.
Okay. Thank you
For that. Yep.
Thank you very much for your testimony, and we're going to close the hearing on that and hear from our next sponsor, SB 540. Yeah, sorry about that. Senator Lang, you're recognized.
Good morning, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. My name is Daley Fournette, and I am the Senate Majority Caucus Director. I was asked to introduce Senate Bill 540 on behalf of Senator Lang. Senator Lang wishes he could be here, but as an elected town moderator, he has a conflict as he's working the polls for the First in the Nation primary. Senate Bill 540 stemmed from the discussion around last year's Senate Bill 79, which was passed but later vetoed due to a drafting error that no one caught. Senator Lang supported the veto due to that drafting error. Senate Bill 79 was an attempt to expand net metering to 5 megawatts for commercial manufacturing type businesses with on-site consumption requirements. The goal was to reduce the cost of the energy for these businesses and encourage more businesses to come to New Hampshire without having high energy costs as a barrier. Senator Lang had intended to bring back Senate Bill 79 with the addition of a storage requirement to assist in high peak energy use times by adding the ability to pull from local energy storage to the distribution lines versus pulling the same energy across the transmission lines, which increases peak energy costs. In speaking with the Department of Energy, Senator Lang and the department came to a compromise where they can investigate how energy storage as a component of a well-thought-out net metering plan can help eliminate and possibly any possible cost shifting to other ratepayers and make the New Hampshire grid more resilient. While Senator Lang strongly supported the original bill, SB 79, with the correct amendment, he is hoping with this investigation we can finally get to a place where we can move the cap on net metering for our commercial and manufacturing businesses in the state of New Hampshire in a reasonable and responsible way. Senator Lang, thanks you for your consideration of SB 540. Thank you for allowing me the opportunity to speak. If you have any questions, I will defer them to Senator Lang, or I'd be happy to take them back. And I believe the department's here to speak on it as well.
Thank you very much, Daley. You did a good job. Seeing no questions, we'll listen to the department. Who's nebulous? Ambivalent?
I think the word of the day is ambivalent. Good morning, Mr. Chairman. Again, for the record, Josh Elliott, Director of the Division of Policy and Programs. The department is neutral on this bill. As Daley mentioned, we were happy to work with Senator Lang. I know battery storage is something that has been particularly interested to a number of stakeholders, including Senator Waters. I know we have a current investigation underway to freight it as such. It has met with a number of delays. I know there were some consternation in previous hearings about this. It had swapped back and forth between the Public Utilities Commission and the DOE. as part of a couple of other bills during the creation of the department, eventually landed back with us. And then we had something called the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law and the Inflation Reduction Act pass, which staff are very hard at work filing applications and trying our best to operationalize those funds. This bill in front of you refreshes that investigation and basically takes it from an internal staff investigation where staff time is limited to a full-blown investigation, and includes a funding source for us to be able to hire consultants to actually engage in this study, avoiding some of the issues that were addressed in the initial proceeding, as well as there were, of course, attempts at our scheduling were then overrun by PUC scheduling things on top of it. So this provides both the study criteria, what the investigation would propose to look at, both looking at both behind the meter as well as utility scale storage, sort of a holistic approach. Again, providing us that mechanism to actually be able to hire consultants to assist the department in actually engaging in this investigation. So
you like it?
I have no complaints. Happy to look, or the department is happy to look at this. This is something that is worth looking at, and this also provides us the resources. And just for folks who may be thinking of doing investigations in the future, this is a good model to look at in terms of the recovery mechanism, because that means we can actually pay for this.
Thank you for your testimony. Questions?
Very
Senator
quickly,
Waters.
yeah. Thank you, Josh. So a couple of matters. You referenced the other storage issue when we heard about it with the DOE or the PUC, what's supposed to be done. I don't know if we want to put it in here, or maybe another bill, but if we could have some language pretty quick about what kind of clarification we need on that storage docket.
So we're all set, because that storage investigation event did land with the department. So after it had swapped back and forth, it ended up being a...
It's going to happen.
Yes.
So we don't need to do anything?
Yes. So this refreshes it, provides additional expanded scope, and provides us the resources to
I
do
just
it.
wanted to make sure that, I see them as two tracks, but that is going to happen, so I don't have to do any legislation on it.
This would supersede it. So all of the requirements that were included in the first one have been included in this one as well, but with an expanded scope. So it refreshes that investigation and provides us the resources to actually conduct the investigation.
So I got to ask more about this, but I had thought that other one would proceed by itself, because otherwise it's going to be delayed as this goes forward.
We don't have the resources right now to do it. We can try our best, but again, with the time demands on staff between the new federal funding applications and other measures, we can try our best, but this actually gives us the resources to actually be able to do it in a comprehensive and full way.
And just to put on the table for the committee that there is some consideration about trying to bring back a corrected version of Senate Bill 79, as Senator Lang's testimony mentioned, and we will have an opportunity to think about that when we talk more about this bill. But thank you, Mr. Chairman.
You're welcome. Further questions from the committee? Seeing none, the hearing is closed. Yay, very early. Wow, I'm out by 12. Okay.
I know. We can do next week.
Yeah. I have to get done. Can't see. It was